It's now 6 o'clock. I'll call this work session to order. Could we do a roll call, please?
Councilmember DeWillis.
Here.
Councilmember Dowell.
Here.
Councilmember Marks.
Present.
Councilmember Mosley.
Present.
Councilmember Wilden.
Here.
Vice Mayor Coates.
Here.
And Mayor Shaw.
Here.
And we have a quorum.
Okay. Now that you've been standing there for a good 10 minutes, Sammy, we're going to talk about the City of Cottonwood's dark sky community designation.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council. Sammy Real, the Director of the Community Development Department, here today to discuss the status designation of our dark sky community that we have with the Dark Sky International Association. So today's presentation, I'm going to give you a little bit of a background on how we got to where we are today, and then asked to have a discussion on next steps, since next steps are vitally crucial to our status designation going forward. So back in 2016, the City Council directed staff to pursue the dark sky community designation, and they did just that. So there were several meetings over the course of the next 2 years that happened, and those meetings you can see are listed here. And then finally, in October 2018, there was an ordinance that was adopted to amend our lighting standards to be consistent with the International Dark Sky Association's model ordinance. That ordinance went into effect in November of 2018, and as of 2019, the city was granted a designation as being a dark sky community from the Dark Sky Association. We were 23rd in the world. I thought that was kind of cool. I wanted to point that out. And then where we are today, well, not really where we are today, but our outdoor lighting standards, again, as I said, that they reflected the International Dark Sky Association's model lighting standards. They were reviewed and approved by the Dark Sky Association. The lighting fixtures in that ordinance were designed so that they focused on fixture design, lumens, kelvins, hours of operation, and more. And I think it's important to note that the city's requirements to have down-shielded lighting dates back to actually 1999. So the city of Cottonwood was right after Flagstaff in adopting these, I would say kind of back then, these really kind of revolutionary new lighting standards to make sure that we were protecting our dark skies. City staff, when they were reviewing new development, and this includes remodels and tenant improvements, we make sure that all that development conforms to our current lighting standards. We also will respond to code enforcement cases if somebody says that their lights are bright and try to work with them to bring them into compliance. The Dark Sky Model Ordinance that was approved by the Dark Sky Association includes what I would call an amortization period that requires all lighting within the city to become compliant with our current lighting standards. So there is a provision in there that says that non-conforming lighting can remain for a period of 10 years, and then at such time, at the end of that 10 years, all lighting in the city must be dark sky compliant. The requirements to have a designation for dark sky community requires us to take brightness measurements quarterly. We have to have 2 dark sky awareness events, and then we have to prepare annual events and have those submitted to and approved by the Dark Sky Association. There was a requirement when we applied for our application to be a dark sky community that we said that all city lighting would be compliant with the dark sky ordinance by a 5-year time period. And so that was met, so that was done as of 2023. There is also a provision in there that requires signage to be installed in the community indicating the designation. We haven't done that. We do have a symbol on our community development website but we have not installed a sign out in the community indicating that we are a dark sky community. And then the other requirement is, as I mentioned earlier, is that it requires all lighting to be compliant within 10 years of the effective date of the ordinance. So that 10-year mark would be November of 2028. I also want to point out that in the prior meetings that the City Council had, you saw that there were 4 meetings that the City Council had. Reading through the minutes of those, that 10-year amortization period was discussed in each of those meetings. And it was even shared at that time that if the city did not include that amortization period in the regulations, that we potentially would not be eligible to be a dark sky community. So I want to point that out, that it was known at that time what the requirement would be. So what happens next? Since I've started my position, one of the things that I continued to hear from staff are, what are we going to do about dark sky? We're getting really nervous. We're coming up on our deadline. And it wasn't until I started digging into this that I found the significance of what they were trying to relay to me. So after talking to a representative from the Dark Sky Association, I did learn, didn't really dawn on me at the time, but I did learn that if the city's lighting, the lighting within the city on private properties are not compliant by that November 3rd, 2028 deadline, we could jeopardize our community, our dark sky community designation. I had several calls with the representative. I said, look, we're meeting all of our reporting requirements, our measurements are good, we're having our events. What happens if we can't get residents, business owners to bring their lighting into compliance with these standards? They said plainly, well, you jeopardize losing your designation as a dark sky community. So I just wanted to share that. So what does this look like to staff? So if we continue down the path of wanting to make sure that we're going to keep our designation, there are some tasks that we wanted to start contemplating. We've had some meetings internally to think about what we can do to get us there as a city, as a group. And so some ideas that we have come up with is, obviously we have to keep doing what we've been doing, so keep having the events, keep putting out informational bulletins, messaging about our dark sky, keep doing the annual reports. But what we discussed, and these are just some options, is that it would require us ramping up our education efforts. So we would, just some ideas, putting some quarterly information flyers in the utility billing statements, working with the local hardware stores. We heard, I think it was from somebody, we went down to Fountain Valley's Dark Sky event, and we heard that the Ace Hardware at a certain community was very, very helpful in spreading the word on dark sky lighting. And the jurisdiction had prepared a large poster, an informational poster that Ace Hardware was very happy to put up in the community, promoting the light bulbs, the light fixtures. So that's an example of for the educational campaign efforts. And then something else that we thought of is that we'd probably have to go to each homeowners association or business association, any associations out there that we can get to where we can talk to the association and the property owners to let them know of this requirement. We had some ideas about how we could actively seek partnerships and sponsorships. So for instance, in the city of Flagstaff, they actually have a nonprofit that leads their efforts with regards to providing funding opportunities for business owners and for property owners. That way the city is not responsible for distributing funds that would probably be questionable. But so the Flagstaff had teamed up with a nonprofit. I've also learned that the city of Sedona, while the city of Sedona is a dark sky community, the dark sky designation was sought after by Keep It Beautiful Sedona, and Keep It Beautiful Sedona is the one who is responsible for all of the annual reports, the reporting, the events, everything that they have to do in order to keep the designation. And Dark Sky Sedona also partners with other I'll say either agencies, they seek out grants, they seek out donations, and then they're the ones who are providing some funding assistance for the residents and the business owners within the city of Sedona. And just some thoughts that we had. Hopefully we can coordinate and work with local companies on possibly providing discounts for light bulbs or fixtures, or just anything that we can do where we can potentially get some funding assistance for property owners and for business owners. I saw one jurisdiction, they were successful in getting CBDG grants and then using those funds for purposes of providing some financial assistance to property owners and business owners. And then there's other funding options too. And then last but not least, and I put this last but not least, is in order for us to meet the deadline of having all the lighting in compliance with the dark sky lighting standards that we have in our zoning ordinance now, it would require us to do some proactive enforcement. So far, again, all we've been doing is we've been reviewing development proposals, new development, redevelopment, tenant improvements, to make sure that those regulations are being met with that new development. But we have not been going out and proactively trying to work with property owners and business owners to bring their lighting into compliance with our current standards. What this would require is, again, dedicating one employee to this effort, but then also working nights to make sure that we can go out and actually see the lighting to see if it complies with dark sky, take the measurements, do what we need to do in order to do that. So I have the next question of, what does this look like to you? I don't know if you've ever seen this diagram before. I used to roll my eyes every time one of my prior bosses would show it to me, but it's called the triple bottom line. And there was always a situation that this can be used, so I thought, oh, somehow it got ingrained in my brain, and now I always come to this triple bottom line to try to visualize how we can make decisions that balance the three important things at the same time. And so this helps us weigh trade-offs so that one priority doesn't overwhelm others. And I want to start off, before I go into each one of these and why I picked these words, in saying that we acknowledge the importance of dark sky and support dark sky stewardship. But continuing the designation requires us to balance community, fiscal responsibility, and tourism, and all of their benefits and impacts. So I'll first go into community, because community, I think, is the one that's on top of everybody's mind, which is why it's on top, is that the community involves our residents, our business owners, property owners. It includes, to me, environmental stewardship. It has to do with the health of our community, and the health of our community doesn't just have to do with humans, it has to do with plants and animals too that are impacted by, we'll just say, brightness at night. It involves quality of life and the enjoyment that I think we all get by enjoying the dark skies that we have. And then I'll move to tourism. So tourism to me involves economic benefits and impacts. Advertisements on tourism, which we do. We have on our Visit Cottonwood website, we have a stargazing webpage. We've put out digital ads, social media ads about our dark sky community designation and come see the stars. It involves what the visitor experience is, branding, and then I tie the environment back to tourism, because we have some wonderful things in the city of Cottonwood that relate back to the environment and the tourism that comes here for that. And then fiscal responsibility. I added this one not just for what's fiscally responsible for the city, but what's fiscally responsible just in general. So this to me includes advertisement and promotion efforts. What is the cost of that? Staffing resources, so again, night shifts. If we proceed with this, we're gonna have to work hard on creating partnerships, finding hopefully either a nonprofit, applying for grants, managing programs, and then trying to find those funding opportunities and really putting forth a hard effort in making sure that we're trying to do what we can to help our residents and help the business owners. And then the cost to the community, what is the financial impact to the community for those that have not converted their lighting? We have a variety of developments all the way from single-family homes to multifamily projects, to affordable housing projects, to industrial projects that we would be potentially going after to ensure compliance. And then kind of goes back to the availability of funding resources and then having staff be responsible for any financial programs that we are able and successfully are able to create. So I wanted to just end with that and why I had this as the triple bottom line, and wanted to have the discussion because if we want to continue with our dark sky designation and if we cannot get, residents and business owners to comply, I just wanted to be able to make sure that we have that discussion so that there's full transparency in this process and receive the direction from the City Council on whether or not we want to fight hard for us to maintain our designation, or if for some reason in the future we lose our designation, we still can tout being dark sky. Again, we have been dark sky, I'll say kind of compliant, since 1999. We're meeting all of our measurement numbers. We can still do everything that we can to make sure that we're promoting and protecting our dark skies, with the exception of putting the financial burden on business owners and property owners to convert their lighting to be dark sky compliant. So with that, that's all that I have.
Thank you. One of the things that occurs to me, there's kind of a sense of an over-the-top, all-out effort. Let's knock ourselves out to preserve this, or let's just kind of let it go and maintain our ordinance and say we're dark skies, which we can do that too. But there might be a couple of steps in between. My reading of the requirements for the International Dark Skies indicates that if your designation was awarded after October 1st of a calendar year, that it goes into the next calendar year. So instead of ending at 28, it would be in 29, which buys us a little more time. And there might be a couple of partners that we could at least check in with and say, hey, this is something that you might have an interest in. One of them is the Verde Valley Astronomers Club. They've been around a long time. If they don't have any interest in supporting this, then maybe letting it go isn't that big a deal. And the other people that we might be able to involve in this, as we involve them in everything else, is APS. Can they help us? What are some of the residences and businesses that pose a threat to the dark skies ordinance?
So we have not yet had a analysis. We haven't had staff go out and do a nighttime survey of properties throughout the city of Cottonwood. Again, wanted to have this discussion first. I do agree that there probably are some steps that we can do before the first report after the November 2028, because the reports, I think, are due August into October. So you're right, we would not have to do our first annual report until that following year in 2029. But we don't have an accounting right now of properties that are not dark sky compliant. We do receive complaints of older properties that are and try to work with them, but we don't have a full analysis or have done a inventory of all non-compliant properties.
Okay.
So go ahead, Mr. Marks.
Well, I just want to make sure that this has been checked and that even if we lose our IDA dark sky designation, we can still call ourselves a dark sky community and we're not violating a statute or a trademark or a copyright or
So dark sky community is a trademark term, so we would not be able to use that. But there is a lot of communities around the country that use verbiage
Dark
that...
Sky Skid City?
I wish I could remember some, but they use verbiage that does not get them in trouble
Okay.
with a trademark logo such as a dark sky community. And it is quite common.
Okay.
And it doesn't, that designation, does it mean that we have to undo our ordinance, which should be preserved? Because we want people to do this, not so that we can stick a label on it, but so that we can actually have dark skies, So, yeah, the ordinance would stand, and what we're talking about, though, is enforcement, the difficulties. I like the idea that the Verde Valley Astronomy Club might go around and check out some businesses, but they can't go on private property and measure people's lumen output or something like that. That would be something that law enforcement would have to do, isn't it? I mean, how could...
I don't think that,
Enforcement.
yeah,
Okay.
I don't know if law enforcement, they would have to have a reason to go on to property. If there wasn't already a call or some kind of permission to go onto the property. I do want to clarify, though, if there was an amendment to the ordinance, the amendment would be that we would remove that 10-year stipulation, still keep it, that any lighting would need to be brought into compliance with today's standards, but we would remove that provision that requires all lighting within the city to be compliant at the end of that 10-year mark.
So, Ms. Real, I wanted to follow up on a statement you made about your department's work to address non-compliant lighting. How successful have you been in working with property owners?
So from my understanding with staff, we've been successful because we would hold their certificate of occupancy. We would not sign off on certain sign-offs that they would need in order to be able to either move into their buildings or get their occupancy. In terms of those lighting, so we do have situations, be fully transparent, we do have situations where there is lighting that's installed when a project comes forward to receive their final sign-off, and then we're made aware afterwards that they changed the lighting, so then there's a complaint, and then we have to go out and we work with them to make sure that they're putting in the lighting that they were approved and said that they were going to originally put in and did, and then subsequently remove. So it's an ongoing effort that we experience with regards to lighting compliance. I'd say overall we're fairly successful, but we're fairly successful with those applicants and those developers that need us to sign off on something versus property owners and residents who don't.
Right, and I guess I misunderstood your earlier comment because I took it to mean, let's say I have non-compliant lighting and a neighbor is unhappy that I have this bright light on all night long, and they call your department, and then your department takes action. Have you had much of that type of work?
Yes. Well, I would say not much of that work, but in my understanding, the few instances that we have had that situation where it's non-compliant lighting, they didn't come in for any new type of development, redevelopment, or tenant improvement, that our staff has been able to get them to bring that lighting into compliance.
And my other question is, how have communities like Flagstaff that are IDA communities, how did they meet this standard? I mean, do they really have a code enforcement person, checking on people's properties? I mean, how do they do that, and can we learn something from them?
Sure. So City of Flagstaff, what they did is they designated a full-time staff person to go out and analyze all of the lighting within the city. And this occurred over years, many, many years. And what they would do is they would try to work with property owners and really try to work with property owners. And if they couldn't get the property owners to come in compliance, what they would end up doing is issuing warnings. Warnings would then lead to violations. If the violations were left unresolved, then those violations would lead to fines. If those fines, the whole idea of fines is you don't pay a fine to allow your non-compliant lighting to remain. You pay fines as a penalty in hopes that it gets them to bring their lighting into compliance. If they don't bring their lighting into compliance after fines, then sometimes there's penalties, and penalties could result in jail time and other types of penalties. So that's my understanding of what the City of Flagstaff has done. And then they also had the assistance, again, of a nonprofit that was created and formed to provide assistance, to help provide education, to help kind of be that voice that supports the efforts of the City of Flagstaff.
I just have to say, I really don't like the avenue of enforcement. I don't like the avenue of the approach of enforcement to get to this, to meet this November 2028 goal. I just don't think that's a path to take, personally.
Madam Mayor, thank you. If I can interject here, Mayor and Council, on the enforcement side of things and to what Sammy said, part of the reason why we haven't gone out to try to truly determine the lack of compliance is once we're aware of it, we can't look the other way. You know, the municipal code is our local laws, and so sometimes it's better to not go down that road until we have this conversation with council to determine what level of enforcement or what level of participation council wants us to have in that. And so that's why we've specifically held off. And her department has basically been responding on a complaint-only basis and reactive to those complaints that come in, because then we have to follow up on that. But we have not gone out and done that assessment ourselves for that very reason.
I do. I think that enforcement would be almost impossible at times. It would just become so complicated, and it would take years and years beyond the deadline that we're currently talking about. And I feel okay about, maintaining the ordinance because we do want to maintain dark skies. But if we don't have a seal of approval from an international board, I'm okay with that too. However, one of the things that I was wondering, and I know it's not provided for in the application process, but there should be some level of appeal for more time. I mean, it's not that we may ever get around to enforcing, heavily enforcing a dark sky requirement, but if we could buy ourselves some more time, we could relax a little bit and make some functional plans about, as old businesses go away and new businesses come in, and we put new requirements for lighting on those businesses, and, residents move out and new people come in. It's easier to change things out over time than it is to go from, business to business and house to house, making demands on people and threatening them with fines in prison because of their outdoor lights, So would it be possible, would it be reasonable, is what I'm asking, I guess, to compose a letter and at least request appeal for more time to come into compliance?
So I already have correspondence relating to that, because I asked. I asked what happens if we can't demonstrate that all lighting in the city is compliant with our regulations by that deadline. And the deadline truly is that first report after the November deadline, which would be in 2029. Their response, to be quite candid, was very unsympathetic to our situation. And they had asked the question, well, what have you been doing all this time? And then went on to explain that we really believe that 10 years was enough for for the message to go out and for people to convert their lighting. So what the response I did get back with regards to answer your question on the extension was, well, if it can't be demonstrated in that first report that all lighting in the city is compliant with the dark sky regulations or with our lighting standards, but you're able to demonstrate that you're still working on it, then we will consider, allowing you to keep your designation while you're working on it. But at some point in time, you have to demonstrate to us that that the lighting in your city is dark sky compliant. So whether we may not lose it immediately, we may lose it a year later. I don't know what the grace period would be after that deadline, but I did have that conversation with them, and I have an email relating to their response as well.
Ms. Rial, I have two questions. Well, I have really one, and I have a statement. I think I know the answer to this question, but do you currently have enough staff to dedicate one of these employees to go out and look at lights?
So this is where I always say I'm a team player. So in reality, probably not, but can we
Okay.
make it work? Yes. Would we have to shift some of our priorities? Absolutely. Absolutely.
I ask that because I know you have a lot of inspections and other things that are going on, and I don't, in my opinion, believe that your people have any more time for take care of another nickel or dime. So it really comes down to this. It really comes down to, we all know they don't have the staff to do it, right? So then it comes upon us. Do we want to spend $100,000, 100 and whatever $1,000 on another employee? Even if we didn't, just say we made it a part-time employee, we're still going to be out $35,000 a year. So we're going to pay $35,000 a year for this. My experience with people who have accreditations like this, cities always end up paying way more than the return on investment, right? You see it on the fire side and the police side. We always do, you got to be accredited. Well, what do we get out of that, right? Finally, the public safety's gone the other way and they realize, but for years, you had police departments paying $150,000, $200,000 a year just to keep their accreditations because they had to have people keeping up with it. That's ridiculous to me. I think the mayor's onto I think we can continue to be a dark sky community with the current code and not worry about this title. Because I'm sure if we broke it down and we told residents, hey, by the way, so we can keep our tag, it's going to cost you another $150,000 a year, $100,000 a year. I don't know that they would be too happy with us for that.
And it's not just that, it's the direct cost of a compliance officer. But, I think, as Ms. Real kind of alluded to, it's the indirect cost of, finding sponsors and rallying, the community and writing grants. It is taking, people away from other projects, other priorities, and it becomes a matter of cost benefit. We have this direct and indirect cost. To me, it hasn't been defined to me what, the benefit is to being called, an officially designated dark sky community.
I agree with what's been said, absolutely. Plus, why put off the inevitable, in my opinion? So I agree with everything that's been said.
So, go ahead.
I agree with Councilman Dowell. We have currently 2 code enforcement officers.
Technically, we have 2.5.
2.5, okay. I'm sure if I've ever seen that half driving around, but I hope not. Okay, so how many complaints do you currently have on bright lights?
Don't think that we have any. We had one more recent, prior to me getting here, and I think that they had fixed their lighting to be compliant with what
Okay,
they
so-
said that they were going to do.
So the number of complaints that you're stating automatically justifies what Councilman Dowell said. We don't need, because we don't have the complaint. How many complaints, let's just say, have you gotten just this year?
I don't. It would either be one, if that one, the one that I'm talking about came in this year, or it would have been last year.
Okay, so, yeah, we this is something that we pretty much don't need to really worry ourselves with. Yeah, we have the tag for the dark sky community, and I don't think it's going to be an issue at this point. I think we're okay. I really do.
I just want to make sure, and I know that you weren't able to recall what the alternatives to dark sky community would be, but I would want something that still communicates the message, resonates well in our tourism marketing, our tourism promotion. There are communities, like in Utah, that really, I mean, their dark sky is their primary tourism promotion campaign. So, and actually, as we've had the contract firm come in and talk about, the DMO work and stuff that they're doing, they've actually recommended to us to promote dark sky more than we currently do. So there is economic value to it. And I mean, certainly there's intrinsic value to us as residents. We all appreciate it. We have the astronomy group here that appreciates it. So there's a lot of value, and I don't want to diminish that. I don't think anybody on this council does. So I agree with what the mayor is saying in terms of, let's continue with the ordinance. Let's continue, as new properties come along to ensure that they're compliant.
Right.
And do the best we can to continue along the current path, but not try to meet that 2028 goal.
So I have a question. Assume we do lose designation after 2028, 2029. Can we never apply for the designation again?
No, we could always apply. So for instance, it's my understanding that the town of Camp Verde, they got their designation, they lost their designation, and then they got their designation back.
So really, for all practical purposes, that's kind of I know it's a hard deadline in terms of official designation, but we can still do the marketing that says we have dark skies, and then continue to work for however long it takes to get in full compliance.
I 100% agree with that approach. I'm not asking, please don't think I'm asking to give up our efforts on dark sky. I do think that we have plenty of time to still do this educational campaign push, minus the efforts of trying to seek grants or anything else, and ask for voluntary compliance. Stress the importance of what dark skies mean to our community, stress the importance of why we have those regulations in the first place, what their benefits are in terms of health or community benefits, and continue, marching down that path. And I think when we finally get to, the deadline, we'll just call it, we do an analysis then and see where we are. Again, my goal in having this discussion is to make sure that what we were facing in terms of the potential of losing our designation, and if we really wanted to work to keep that designation, what we would have to do, what other communities have done to do that. And really have the opportunity to hear from you and what your goals are or what your requests are. And, again, continue. Keep our ordinance, keep our language, keep the efforts going. I still say ramp up our educational. We could have a coffee with council where we bring in astronomers and maybe do that when the nights are earlier and have them bring out telescopes, and we could do a coffee with council with telescopes and, hopefully get the message out in a more consistent and kind of in-your-face type of campaign.
Well, I did attend one of the events. Miss Hayden was there and had the Verde Valley Astronomy Club with their, we were basically looking at the moon. When you're in the middle of a parking lot in town, there's not much more that you can look at. But there are opportunities to do more dark sky viewing and promote that dark sky quality. And maybe it is a tourist draw of some sort, but I'm pretty much guessing that our residents don't have, the majority of our residents are probably not very invested in keeping the dark sky designation as it stands today. But we can certainly create our own logo, our own messaging, and our own, hey, we have this, it is part of our local ordinance. So we have a foundation for continuing to promote dark skies. And yeah, I remember this discussion when I was a Parks and Rec commissioner. One of the commissioners, Bill Bowden, who has since passed away, was one of the great proponents of this. And my mom was the treasurer for the Verde Valley Astronomy Club for a long time. So this was really an important issue for her and that club, and I was aware of that at the time. So it's something that I do feel has intrinsic value more than anything else. Preserving dark skies has intrinsic value. So we want to do that, but we don't have to do it with an IDA designation. If it comes down to it, we can let it go.
Ms. Rial, considering the direction that you're hearing from the council, will you continue to do annual reports or events up until that time that we face this deadline? Will you continue to do that?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because if we can get voluntary compliance, then it's a win. And I think that should really be our goal, is to get voluntary compliance without, going out, as I heard earlier, and issuing violations and citations and penalties and fines. And to your point earlier, we have plenty of time to make that educational campaign and put that out and really strive to show the residents and business owners in Cottonwood, the importance of this and share our goal. We still have time. It's easy to go have conversations, with Ace Hardware and maybe some other hardware stores or businesses out there to try to see what type of promotions that we can get from them and how they're willing to help in this effort as well. So, that's all stuff that we can definitely do, and that's easy to do. And I would 100% recommend that we still do all of our annual reporting and our quarterly measurements and our 2 events, everything and anything, in case there is a chance that at the end of this we can maintain our designation.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Mommy, why did Daddy have to go to jail? He wouldn't take the floodlight down, honey.
I just want to keep this out, first and foremost, though, regardless of when if we get everybody to voluntary comply, then we're good to go, right? But that'll never happen. Hopefully we can get a large amount, but I say that because this is always going to cost us some money, even if we let it go and come back, because we can't shortchange planning and zoning or community development with bodies. So I just want to put that out there that we need to be dedicated to spend the money for it. I don't want to tack on something else to another employee.
This is just continuing something that's already.
No, I understand that, but we talked about going out possibly later. If we do it later, there's still a price tag to it. So, thank you, Sammy.
Understood. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a wonderful evening. See you next week.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, next we have introduction, discussion, and possible direction to staff regarding the City of Cottonwood Emergency Operations Plan, EOP. Good evening, Chief Sontman.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of council. Thank you for the opportunity to come here this evening and discuss this. Mine's not nearly as cool as that one, so we'll do the best we can.
Oh, I wouldn't say that.
All right, so just to keep this as kind of simplistic as possible, this discussion can be lengthy and very far at depth into the weeds. It's a very intensive process that's gone through, and that was one of the factors in why we made the development that we did and the information was presented. I know the file was very large. Apologies for that, and Tammy and I worked diligently to get that together for you folks. For a chance to review it. So an emergency operations plan, for those who may not be familiar, is basically a comprehensive framework of how we are going to manage emergencies in general. And when we say that, we're not talking about the routine type of incidents. We're not looking at car accidents and house fires. This is large-scale natural or man-made disaster kind of events. We also use this a little bit in the event management arena, things like TVR, the fair, larger events like that. Some of this does apply to those. We can discuss that at length later. One of the things the plan will do is define roles and responsibilities and the coordination that takes place. When we talk about coordination there in the next bullet, it says aligned with local, state, and federal systems. Those who are familiar with the national preparedness directives that go on, this comes down from FEMA Homeland Security, and it applies basically to every authority having jurisdiction across the United States. And the idea in that is that when everybody is working towards that common objective that is defined in the National Preparedness Directive, then we're all singing from the same sheet of music. So as an example, recently, if you folks are familiar, the flooding that occurred in Globe this last year was a good example of that. By using emergency operations plans and the different stuff that was available from the local and Globe to the county, all the way to the state, brought in additional resource to help them manage and do the things that were necessary for the event itself, and then the post-recovery of that process, and now they're at the mitigation point. That's how those things get aligned, and it brings to bear more resource to support communities. And why does this matter? In simple terms, we're all familiar with this. This is really what we're all about at this level, is we're protecting life, property, and the environment ultimately. And it enhances the coordination across these agencies, and this diagram here is just a representation of what that may look like. You have a given incident, whatever that may be, and all of these individual departments and groups are going to come together in a common effort, what we call whole community approach within this arena, to solve the problem and to move away from that, go through the recovery, and then do things in the future to prevent it. And this ensures a rapid and effective response. The part of what the EOP does is it gives us kind of standard documentation and information on how we're defining those roles, responsibilities, the emergencies themselves. But further in the document, you saw the section that we call the annex. The annexes are very specific criteria that applies to the individual departments and how they're going to respond based on the given emergency. And so that's where this increases that effective response in the speed of it. Some of the things that are going to be defined within the EOP is what we call the command and control. And that's the process of utilizing ICS and the NIMS protocol that has been established nationwide. It helps coordinate communication systems, resource management, which is the singular biggest challenge that all rural Arizona faces, and then obviously public information that's very critical. Everything from the information that the community leadership would like to convey through the city manager and through what we're doing at the emergency itself to make sure that our community is wholly aware of what's going on. The operational phases that we're going to define within the document are going to be what we refer to as preparedness. Actually, this meeting right now is a piece of that process, making sure that everybody understands what we're doing, and that's part of preparedness, going through training. Recently, a bunch of city staff took the ICS 402 class, which I'm very proud to say we owned the room. There was, I believe, 5 or 6 of our folks to, I think, 2 in a couple other jurisdictions. It's also going to help us with understanding what does response look like. How are we going to go about the business of managing an incident? And then what are we going to be doing as we transition into the recovery process and mitigation to follow? And sometimes mitigation following is kind of a gray area. You're thinking, well, if we're going to mitigate the problem, that may prevent the incident from occurring. We look at these kind of scenarios as being cyclic in nature. So when we think about, use this idea, the biggest threat in Arizona is wildfire. Second to that is flooding, post-wildfire risk. So that's where the mitigation comes into play after an incident has occurred. That's where we can receive funds and support from the federal government and all different levels within that process where we can do good work to prevent this stuff in the future. Local implementation, as we discussed earlier, we need to make sure that the players are all there and understand what their roles look like. That's the purpose of the annex. As an example, we are recently just going through processes where we coordinate very much with transit. Transit has always been kind of the stepchild who gets left off to the side and they'll get there when they get there. They're actually extremely critical in all of this process, and I don't know that's always been globally understood when it comes to evacuation or even managing our own people. Those who are familiar with the events of 9/11, when everything happened there, they were using the city bus system to transport firefighters to and from because they did not have access to their equipment. So some of those little things that often get oversighted matters in this process. So making sure this coordination is done ahead of time is a very critical factor. This document helps us coordinate that. Integration with the county and state EOCs, that's defined as well within the document. One of the things that's important to understand in this entire evolution is the process of declaration. According to Homeland Security and FEMA, every incident begins and ends locally. And that's an important distinction to understand, because if you have a given incident, this is where you get too far into the weeds, understanding what the Stafford Act authorities and things that affect recovery are very important to what we do. And the part of the EOP is to help us understand what does that look like. So bringing to bear all of those resources, county, state, all the way out to the federal government, helps us in that evolution. Without this information, it then, I guess for lack of a better term, not to make it sound bad, but we bought it. And that's an important distinction to make. We don't have the additional support that we're going to need, which is similar to what Globe has faced. They had to make some decisions on the fly that they're now financially responsible for, and they're at the point of considering bankruptcy. That's a big deal.
Ron, can I stop you right there?
Please.
I'm not behind you.
I hear it back here, so.
Sorry. At this slide, where does it start? Where does the chain of command start? Is it with our city manager, or who calls who? How does that work?
It kind of works two different directions. And I thank God I saved you guys the trouble of the diagram that FEMA produced. Obviously, it's wonderful. So it's happening two different directions. So you're going to have the incident aspect of that. Incident commander is going to be on scene, determining the complexity of what this incident is going to look like. That information is then going to be exchanged with the city manager. Those conversations are going to happen, and then it will branch from there and matriculate out is the process. So it's two things simultaneously. It's coming from the ground, and then from the administrative perspective, that's a part of that coordination as well. And then obviously another part of this is defining what the mutual aid agreements look like. Mutual aid agreements are very robust in Arizona. We are lucky that way. Everything from local automatic aid resource, where we're supporting each other jurisdictionally speaking, all the way to we have countywide, statewide mutual aid, and then we have interstate mutual aid, which is called EMAC. And that's when resources are being brought from other parts of the country to help support that, whatever our incident may be. Again, challenges that we face in rural Arizona, all over the country, but the rural communities in general. Limited resource, that's a big deal. There's no good answer for that. We're all in the same boat. It doesn't matter where you are. If you have a ton of money or if you don't have any money, you're still going to face the same thing. That's just a public safety challenge. Communication gaps, being able to talk globally. Now, we've done a lot of efforts, especially in Cottonwood. I'm pretty proud of this with Chief Frudenthal and you folks making this possible. Our communication is pretty robust in comparison to some of our peers. So I really appreciate that. So we do very well there, but you're always going to encounter it, especially when you get into the mutual aid process. You may get a jurisdiction coming from the state of New Mexico, and they have no clue what channels we operate on, and then being able to get them tools and equipment to be functional. Part of what the EOP does is it gives us the structure and the guidance on how to do that very thing. How do we make everybody on the same page in a given emergency? Evolving threats, understanding what that looks like, understanding that in Arizona, wildfire is always going to lead to flooding, and then you also have obviously our wonderful weather depending on the time of year. All of those things are pretty common. Ironically, one of the things that never gets discussed but is number 4 on our list is earthquakes. It's very interesting that a lot of folks don't know how seismic this area really is. We see it around us with the mountains, but we don't realize that it happens daily. And then training and readiness, that's again a part of the preparedness initiatives that are defined within the document. And then it's also best practice, and we've had a lot of discussions with Mr. Cifuentes and staff. Getting out there, and that process is always evolving. Normal processes that are going to be associated with these documents, and it's going to be any part of the emergency management process will follow similar structure. We're always going to have regular plan updates and/or revisions and full rewrites. This basically was what we would consider a full rewrite, and that was because we were beyond our 5 years and it was necessary. The original template that we utilized here in the city of Cottonwood was a document I was intimately familiar with, and we created that document when I was with County Emergency Management, and it became a part of that effort was to get everybody together. So the county document, the city document, everybody was on that same page. That was the intent. We also, Arizona does fortunately give us the opportunity to be able to accept and/or adopt the county that we're within. That is part of that alignment process, so that's this proposal. Training and exercise is defined within it, or what's also called the MITEP, Multi-Year Training and Exercise Plan. That's something that the fire department does retain, but that can also be broadened to the entire city so that we can coordinate global trainings that happen to make sure everybody is operationally sound. Public outreach, that's done kind of on a consistent basis. I defined it here as monthly because we want to make it a point to do a better job at that. Traditionally, we have not done well in this arena of emergency management advising the community. We've had campaigns and we've been very successful with that, and if we did it more consistently, we would see a better preparedness throughout the community. Things such as pushing Firewise. That's something we've done successfully here. We have one community now, several others are knocking on the door, and it's just something we do when we do National Night Out. All these processes are a part of that. And then investment in infrastructure. That's an ongoing thing. You guys are intimately familiar with that. Everything from your roads to your communication systems to everything that we consider a defined infrastructure. Part of recovery requires us to understand that because of how we receive support in the event of an incident. Defining in the Stafford Act authorities, public versus private infrastructure matters because that's where money comes in or doesn't come in. So the work that we're doing on infrastructure now pays a dividend later down the road when we're talking about things that need to be repaired or replaced. And that was it. So really, I just want to answer any questions you folks may have, or I'll just completely get out of your way.
I'm gonna go the opposite way now.
Okay.
With new employees. Who does the city's emergency management?
Technically, that falls to me right now, and that is a shared responsibility with Mr. Cifuentes.
So you have time to do all the emergency. So what you're saying is you have all the time you need to do all the emergency management stuff along with your fire chief duties?
Technically speaking, no. No.
Mr. Fuentes? How about you?
No, I think that part of this is being prepared for that. We don't have that dedicated person. Chief and I have discussed, partnering with the county. I've had big success in the past in having the County Office of Emergency Services take the lead on that, which is kind of where we're headed this direction by utilizing their plan and just having our own annexes. Those are the things that we haven't planned for yet, and then we need to. We've talked about a dedicated emergency operations center, something that has its own generator backup. I've been fortunate or unfortunate to be part of 3 actual emergencies, and one of them lasted for 6 days. We have to plan for that. In an area like ours where the threat of fire is there and we're by a river, those are things we have to plan for, and this is that first step. I think, it's just the first step. You'll start to see that. I think, for us, it's then identifying, which folks we've had initial training already on the NIMS for most of staff that have not had that before, and that's an important component. But it's something that we're definitely looking at. And, we just adopted a tentative budget, and we couldn't add the additional positions that we needed, but we're going to start having some conversations over the coming months about our rates and fees and how we're paying for different things and what council priorities are. And those are things, why we have these conversations, so that remains top of mind with council.
Well, I just say that because I know that emergency management always ends up being a second, right? Like, I'll get to that as soon as I can.
Sure.
And you really never get to it in its fullest capacity. I mean, just watching the emails come in from county risk management, it's an overwhelming thing. So I just want to put that out there because
If I could add, sir, real quick, in support of what Mr. Fuentes is talking about, one of the things that, this is kind of ironic, a little gee whiz story for you. When I was in my master's program, one of the things that I took the initiative to do, because they told us to pick a subject that we felt was relevant. And I thought it was very interesting because you hit it right on the head. Public safety in general really does a poor job of understanding what emergency management is. And it's funny because you always send emergency managers, when you go out and you interview them and you talk to them, they're all ex-fire chiefs, police chiefs, individuals that have done that kind of work in the past. And ironically, emergency management has nothing to do with that. And that's very interesting that we're so behind the eight ball, and this is nationally speaking as an industry. And so therefore, in support of what Mr. Cifuentes is saying, that evolution is necessary no matter what we're doing. So I took the challenge and said, how do you find a better way to integrate normal routine fire departments and public or police organizations into this process? And a part of that, I think, is defining how do we define goals. Do we have the ability to make sure that we are kind of looking at things in that broad perspective, getting the 70,000 foot perspective instead of the 5,000 foot, and making sure that we're trying to do the best we can, because you're right, there is no magic way to ever have enough. It just doesn't happen. We're always behind the eight ball. I worked the EOC during the Yarnell Hill incident, and we managed 800 resource requests within the first 4 hours. And that was just for that singular incident that had nothing to do with the rest of the county during the incident that was going on. So the complexity of it is never attainable. You'll never get there. But what we're doing today in this process gives us the ability to be proactive and be efficient as we can.
Can I ask about, I was kind of interested going through and I've only had this for 5 days, and I've had like 2 medical issues and with family and a bunch of other stuff going on. So I have not pored over every page of this.
Sure.
But I did kind of, go through the county emergency plan and then, look at some of the specifics for the city of Cottonwood. And, I'm trying to kind of understand how they dovetail together, and also I'm trying to, because of some of the wording, some of the information in the totality of these plans, is who is the audience? Is this for staff? Is this for the general public? Is it for me as an elected official? Is it for everyone? Or, I'm just trying to kind of see how you visualize this.
Sure. The answer to that is yes. And what I mean by that is that that's a very good question. It really is. We will technically would like to do both, but ultimately that lies with you folks. And what I mean by that is that the document as you have it presented to you is really meant for staff and at this level within the city leadership and the elected officials. They get the nuts and bolts and down into the weeds a little bit. They understand more of the depth of what the document has to say, but it's extremely common for the city to choose to create a redacted document where we eliminate a lot of information that is not relevant to citizens. We don't need them. Mr. Joe down the street doesn't need to be calling the Red Cross when he's having a problem. That's the responsibility of us. So we eliminate some pertinent information that we need to be aware of that the citizen does not. And they'll create a redacted document. So the communities needs to understand basically in being able to review this document that we are proactive. We are doing what's necessary in their best interest. And it really just gives them the broad strokes in the idea of what emergency management looks like. Again, there's a lot of misnomer about what it is that emergency management's role is, all the way down to the citizen. We always think that it's the big chaotic event, that it's the big wildfire, it's the 9/11 incident, and that's just simply not true. If we had a cyber threat that somebody attacked, say, the city government, we easily could enact the emergency operations plan to help maintain our continuity of operations. And just something as simple as that one little thing that Joe Blow citizen may not even be aware of. And that's kind of where you have to create some separation. So it is meant for everybody, but we have to structure what you would like folks to be aware of. That's for you to decide.
So you might want to pick out things for the general public, like what to put in your go bag, where to
Correct.
take your pet, where, if you live in this area and there's an emergency, you should go to this center over here?
Yes.
That kind of thing?
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, that would be my wish is, and you had mentioned it yourself, Chief, that more public outreach to help citizens with their emergency preparedness plan, I think is really important. I know I've found information online, but it would be nice to have something local that's more relevant to our local issues. I mean, we had a brush fire in Clarkdale today. You know, I have a friend in Doney Park, which is just west of the Papa Fire. You know, we've had a lot of wind, so we're really in wildfire season right now, and it's a little scary.
Absolutely.
So, so I had two questions. Does the city have an app that sends emergency alerts to the public?
We do. It's called RAVE, and that's done through our dispatch center. So we on the ground, if we're out there and we're encountering a given circumstance, a brush fire, or any number of other things, we contact the dispatch center, notify them of the proximity of where that event is occurring, and then they have the ability to geotag it and therefore start sending out messaging to a defined area that we would like to have under, whether it be evacuation or simply notifying them. Public, utilities has a water main break, they can actually broadcast that to the affected community.
So people don't need to subscribe to this. It's sent through to their cell phones, or how does this work?
They do have to subscribe. It is a part of,
have
that's
to
an unfortunate
subscribe.
reality of our circumstance. The only exception to that rule is what's called iPause, and that is a global system. When you hear your radio go off in your car, and they send out that emergency alert, that's the only other option, and that's done via the county and at the state level, so that's where these relationships are appropriate.
Am I the only one on council that didn't know about RAVE? I didn't know about it.
That actually is managed by PD. We just try to help them get the information out, because it's through the dispatch center.
Okay. Yeah, so that's something I think we really need to
If I may,
make
ma'am,
the
we
public
also-
aware of, so.
Yeah, we have a secondary one, and again, that was a part of a county initiative that we followed upon, and it's called Genesis EVAC. And that is another system that is a subscriber-based. They have to go in, but it gives them pertinent information relevant to an evacuation. If we're evacuating, say, I don't know, the high school and all that area along Camino Real for whatever reason, they will receive information from there on where the shelter locations are, how to get there, routing systems, all of that.
And PD manages that one as well, or?
It's done via the dispatch center, but yes, we do ultimately have control of it.
Okay. And then, what is council's specific role in this emergency management plan? I did a word search, and I didn't really find anything that said specifically what our role is in this emergency management plan.
Sure. Generally, it's kind of simplistic in nature, and what that is to say is that from an emergency management perspective, it's trying to make sure that we are getting resources and all of the things necessary to affect a positive outcome to the incident. The elected officials' role in this really is to be a part of discussion at the highest level. They don't really have anything to do with the emergency. They are going to be receiving information via the city manager to make sure that you are kept aware, and then coordination with communications and public outreach and all of that will happen at that level, and then you folks will be a part of that. So your discussion will be directly with the city manager.
Okay, so we are just informed, and I guess we can communicate those messages to our neighbors, fellow citizens.
That was the reason for my question.
So Chief Saltman's very political response is a long-winded way to say none. That council does not have a role in emergencies, quite the opposite. We will have a PIO, and that's the only person that should ever communicate news from the city. There will be a place for you folks to gather if you choose to not be with your family. And as you said, I will transmit information to keep you abreast of things. But electeds don't play a role in the emergencies.
Okay.
It's very complicated.
And that's fine, I just wanted to make sure I understood what my role was or wasn't.
No, it can be confusing, and so I appreciate that.
In your presentation, issues for council consideration, and that was the reason for my question. And it says, bottom line, staff will incorporate council feedback as appropriate.
Right, and the intent of that is this right here.
Right.
That's what we're referring to. You folks to understand kind of what the global principles are, and then as we move through evolution and progress, you're a part of that decision-making at the financial level and that executive level Mr. Cifuentes was referring to.
Right. Chief, I had a question on, this was a well-thought-through document. Believe it or not, I read it all.
That's impressive.
I read it all. And there were sample media releases, included in here. Who was responsible for, when you say media, what are you talking about? Newspaper, radio?
Yes, it would go via Mr. Cifuentes into our communications specialist that would be responsible for that. And all those simply are just simple kind of draft documents. We would wordsmith and make it appropriate for the given circumstance that's going on.
Right. I much appreciated, considering that I'm, of the older generation here. It says, if you are aware of any handicap or disabled persons in the affected area, please notify them of the emergency situation and assist them if possible, if you are able to help. If not, please notify law enforcement. So that's something that I just felt like was really important for the public to know, because I have neighbors who definitely would need help. And,
Absolutely.
Right, and so I felt like that was really important to be part of a media release.
Yeah, that's definitely a critical factor, and we have several mechanisms in place for that.
Okay.
When we use the term whole community in the process, that's what they're referring to. We consider everything from medical needs to language barrier to the whole 9 yards. That's a part of all of the CPG 101, which is a governing document on how we build this. All of that is addressed. So in order to be compliant, we have to have plans in place and process to make sure we can address those.
It also gets the community involved too.
Yes.
Like you're responsible for your neighbor.
Again, that very well said. That's a big deal. Again, until you've truly experienced one of these large-scale disasters, it's not understood. So you're correct. It does require the whole community. When we're out there, as an example, doing work to manage an incident, or we're making sure that the community is being well taken care of, we're going to utilize a bunch of non-governmental organizations that are going to support that process. The Yarnell Hill incident acknowledged this. We had one of the largest incidents in the history of the fire service. International people knew about it across the world, and they had zero funding from the federal government. And that's an important distinction to make, because there's criteria and thresholds that are associated with the recovery process. If you don't meet a dollar value, good luck, you're on your own. And that's an important thing to understand, because what that means is now the community is responsible for its well-being, and being able to bring it back, that's a part of that same vein.
It's also important that, and I know you know this, Chief, but that people recognize that when there's an evacuation or we ask people to leave, they actually put a burden on public safety by not leaving.
Correct.
Because now it's another eye that somebody has to keep on there. Or, they're told, hey, you're on your own now. We can't guarantee you that we're going to be able to save you or come down and rescue you. But I think that's an important thing before one of these comes out, because of the amount of people who, I'm staying for my property. Well, then you're taking resources from other things, so.
Well said.
Is the city divided up into zones for this purpose?
Yes. So what we have is a couple of different variations of that. From the community's perspective, through Genesis EVAC and through RAVE, we have the ability to be very specifically detailed all the way down to the individual house that we can geofence. However, we also, from a response standpoint for fire, PD is a little bit different. You know this because they're more roaming, if you will, but fire is broke down into 4 quadrants via our dispatch center. So we have, these are numbers that won't matter to you, 4100, 42, 43, and 4400. Those are our zones. So when we dispatch resources, they go to a specific area, and they know that equates to certain resources, and also that tells them a little bit in their response about what they're going to expect when they get there, as far as that very statement that you just made. Are these rural areas? Are they downtown? Do we have water supply? Do we not have water supply? All those factors are accounted for there.
In part of the education, are you going to make that a citizen thing so they understand their zones? Or when the message goes out and says, hey, you 4400ers, you probably need to be set. You 4100s, go. right?
That is correct, yeah. That's a part of what we do. That is also coordinated, Genesis EVAC is also coordinated via, PD has it, we have it, YCSO has it, Yavapai County Emergency Management has it. So we can make a phone call if we're engaged and we're busy with an incident. I can call Yavapai County Emergency Management and tell them, hey, I need this area. They have GIS on staff to be evacuated, and they will broadcast that very thing, exactly what you're talking about. So it is on us to have that campaign. You are correct.
Yeah, and just the last thought on Airbnbs and hotels, is it information on the back of their doors? This is your area, those kinds of things, because they're out of their element. We want to be able to present that. And it only occurred to me after going up the coast, going up Highway 1, and realizing that you're in a flood, a tsunami zone, and it goes back and forth.
Yeah.
And when you go to the hotels, it's on the back. This is what you need to do. So
Correct.
that's the only reason why it occurred to me.
Yeah. We do have a campaign underway right now being defined and set up for our community risk reduction. That's exactly what they're doing.
Chief, how, given any variation of incident, any type of incident, how is the incident commander determined? How do you figure out who's going to head up the operation?
Great question. Usually it's based on the nature of the incident itself. During a wildfire or anything that's going to be medically associated, anything like that, generally is going to fall to the fire department. They will be the initial on-scene commander and probably maintain that. However, you don't put a firefighter in charge of an active shooter. That'll just be a bad day. So then law enforcement takes kind of that front role. As far as a complexity analysis, that's an ongoing process that we do throughout the incident command process. That's based on operational periods, so how much time are we on scene, how many personnel are being cycled through, that all of those things kind of dictate the evolution of what we're doing and where we're trying to go. In the emergency operations world, we try to achieve what we call a battle rhythm. That's a term that we use. In the beginning of every incident, you're always behind the 8 ball. You're playing chase. You're trying to catch up, get in front of it. At a certain point within the evolution, or what we call the life cycle of an incident, you achieve that battle rhythm, and you know you got there as soon as you're bored. That's kind of the indicator, because now things are no longer surprising you. You're kind of ahead of the curve, and you know, okay, well, this is happening next, and that's happening next, and now you're on pace. So there's no definitive criteria other than you're always looking for the best suited individual. Sometimes that can be all the way up to and including the state level. We may have the Department of Emergency Military Affairs being one of the leads. During the Boston Marathon, the initial response came from typical 911 response, and it was the most spectacular medical response in the history of the world, really. They moved 140 patients in under an hour. That's an impossibility anywhere. The reason they were successful is that this process had been rehearsed for 10 years prior to the incident. So it was just another day at the office when it happened. I worked with the incident commander when I was at Teeks. He was a friend of mine, and we had a lot of dialogue about what this looks like. But when you start to get federal involvement, there's a lot of other factors that go into it. So it's based on the complexity and best suited for the situation.
Thank you.
Is there a publication over here?
Gotcha.
Sorry.
Making me crazy.
Is there a publication, or do you have a publication for residents to purchase or something for emergency management on a lower level, so to speak?
That is actually a great question, and we do not. Basically, what is currently available to the citizen comes from a couple of different sources via FEMA. It's done online. They have ready.gov, which is a series of documents actually on given subjects, and it just gives general structure or thought processes to best practice for folks. The county has had campaigns previously that we have access to if we want to support that, where they can go out and do very much similar things. Most of the campaigning revolves around things like making people aware of RAVE, the Genesis EVAC process. They'll do what they call like the 7 Ps, and they'll create a flyer, and it's the Ps all stand for different things that you should be thinking about: pets, prescriptions. It's kind of just a breakdown, a simple little thing like that. YCSO and the rescue, the posses, all those different groups, the Yavapai County rescue groups, They have flyers that they'll hand out. Unfortunately, most of this happens too late, so preparedness is a challenge that nobody really has a good answer for. Where I'm going with that statement is that is something that we could put some effort into at a local level. Determining what's in the best interest of our citizens, that is within our control. We just don't want to circumvent the things that are in place, because then we can look at contradiction. So it's going to have to be coordinated.
Well, I was thinking maybe we should just get you a chair so that we could keep you here all evening, because there's a lot of territory to cover here, but if we're done asking questions, I'm not entirely sure what the direction is, but my initial supposition is that we can be prepared to revisit this, come back, take a look at it, and simply approve it as a City of Cottonwood supplement to the Yavapai County Emergency Services document.
Yeah, the intent of this, Madam Mayor, is that we have the document completed, which is where you have the copy. So what we're looking to do is, via your decision, either bring that to a consent on a future agenda that you would approve that as our document. Then in conjunction with that, we've already established the Yavapai County IGA with the Emergency Management Office. That gives us some additional support that we are going to be utilizing. That's how we're in this. It's kind of sequential. So we get the IGA in place, we get the EOP in place. The next evolution is what we called COOP, and that's continuity of operations. That's another defined document, but that's a electronic version. Anyway, separate conversation. So sequentially, those are kind of the steps that we're trying to do. So I believe the idea in this is that you would consider this to be approved, however you would like to see that at the next meeting.
Okay.
So we need to add it to the agenda, correct?
At some
Future
point,
agenda?
yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
we're okay with
yeah,
that?
That's the direction,
Yeah.
yes.
And I also heard, I made the comment, Mr. DeWillis made the comment, and Chief Saltman also recognized that I think there's a need for more public outreach to citizens with regard to emergency preparedness, whether it's the Raven Genesis evac systems or just, what a to-go kit looks like. I really would like to see that soon, and more work done on that.
We can absolutely do that, ma'am. My proposal for that is, and this is what my staff's current direction is that as we evolve and get into the COOP, which is probably going to be just under a year in the making, part of that evolution is that very thing. Within the COOP structure in the document, it actually works on that very conversation. It looks at it from the city's perspective, but within that, we can also share that information with the community, such as, like you said, go bags. There's very defined criteria of what that should look like, so we can do double duty, is where I was going with that. So that is part of that structure.
But
Is that
Yeah.
something that could be included in the snapshot?
yeah, absolutely. And that was my thought is, for the rave, we can start that immediately and start trying to get the word out, have folks sign up for that, and then we can just start to, migrate over to more of a focus on that community preparedness.
And maybe add that to the water bill as well.
Yeah, mailers do help.
Anything else?
I'm just curious, Mr. Cifuentes, who's our PIO?
Right now, it's Ms. Kostecki.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Chief
it.
Saltman.
I went the wrong way. Sorry about that, sir.
Okay, so we're getting ready just to announce this. We're looking at proposed rules of procedure for city council meetings.
So council, before you tonight is a draft proposed rules of procedure. And this has been probably the topic of discussion between John and I since at least the first meeting I attended here. just because things are different. I think I've told all you folks, even during the interview process, I ask a lot of whys. And the whys for me are, why are we doing certain things? How are things handled this way? Is it because it's an Arizona thing and it's just new to me? Or, is it something that is unique to Cottonwood? Attended many meetings over my career, and some of the things are unique to Cottonwood, but some of them are just the way we've always done it. I'd had conversations through one-on-ones, different council members would say, hey, why do we do things this way, or why do we do it that way? And so I started to look into some of those items, and then quickly determined that we didn't have an official rules of procedure. Council did not. I think, I'll keep my notes here, and you folks always see me writing my notes, and the topic for tonight says initial rules of procedure discussion. I'm going to cover some of those that were in the proposed document. This is one of those PowerPoint presentations where I would encourage engagement on each and every slide, because that's the kind of dialogue that I need. Ultimately, you folks as a body will decide what those rules of procedure are. I'll go back to what I had said to a couple folks when they asked why now, when the council gets along well. I mean, you folks can agree to disagree, and I said because now is the time to adopt rules of procedure. When things are not going well amongst council members, then it's very difficult to get agreement on what those processes should look like. And so with that said, we'll start. And obviously, as it says in the staff report, the purpose is to ensure fair, orderly, and efficient conduct. There will be elements of this that will help guide council discussion, help guide council actions, but ultimately, there are some items that are in the presentation tonight that's not necessarily in the draft, and that's because I need feedback from council on what you'd like those to look like. It's important to recognize that council has already adopted a code of conduct, and this document, if approved by council, will work in conjunction with the code of conduct. It will not specifically address violations of codes and that sort of thing. That's something that rests outside of this particular document. I think there'd been so much discussion about these from John. He'd even stated to me he expected a lot more minutia, and I said, well, that's why I think that we're going to have several discussions about this. And it was important enough for us as a city that we had 2 city attorneys in attendance tonight. First and foremost, obviously, this isn't something that's new to you folks. You know that we have our meeting on the first and third Tuesday of every month. It's generally not a problem for us, and it hasn't been since I've been here, to run long on meetings. Some cities will place a limit on debate and discussions, and to exceed that limit requires a formal action of council. And so I added that in case council has a desire to consider something like that. If not, we can move on this one.
I think that's not a bad idea. I mean, I think after 3 hours, I'm tired, and I'm not sure my brain's working very well anymore after 3 hours. I don't know what everybody else feels.
Yeah, we can't base it on how well my brain is working, because it may not reach 3 hours.
Just so we're clear, I'm not a boomer, I'm a Gen Xer, but I like to go to bed a little bit early, so. 9 o'clock would probably be a good time too.
So if we put a time limit on things and we're not actually finished with items on the agenda, then they move to the next agenda?
Actually, Mayor, what would happen is you would state, you would stop any discussion and state that we've reached that point in the meeting, that per our rules of procedure, and then you would ask council for those particular issues, depending on what's left, if there was a desire to continue the business of that night's meeting, or if they preferred to move it, but that would be your purview as the mayor to control that.
Okay. Actually, I haven't found a point at which it's become necessary.
Right.
So I'm not sure. That seems fine to me, but so far it hasn't been needed. It could be in the future.
It will come.
And if that's a preference, that's
It will
okay
come.
with me.
Yeah, and I think in the past, it was a challenge, so.
So would that be called out on the agenda as kind of a, just like the instructions for call to public? It would not?
No, not typically. Like I said, because to do so, if you have meetings that are contentious, to do so may extend the call to the public or people's kind of raucous nature to the point where they really don't want formal action to be taken on some of those things. And so it's like I said, there will be the odd times that it comes up, but, I remember the meeting where my previous city, my contract was approved. There was just this lengthy stuff going on, and I remember thinking afterwards that they had adopted a rate study and a fairly significant ordinance and hired a new city manager at 10:47 at night. And there were folks that were waiting in the audience for some of those in front of me, and at some point about 9:30, they got up and left, and the lady said, "Hun, we have to go home, like, I can't sit anymore." And so you're right, after 9 or 10 o'clock, there's not good governance that's going on. And so there is a good reason for not to continue doing it. But if that's, you folks make the decision, and I guess what I'm hearing from folks is 9 o'clock is kind of the bewitching hour for us here.
Or there should be margaritas after that.
Yes.
Or,
It seems like most of it
provision made.
would be repetitive, and then you're probably addressing it later on in this.
Yes.
About people being repetitive.
Correct.
So we'll get there.
Okay.
Yes, we will get to that.
Yes.
That's definitely a point that we want to discuss.
Just, Mayor and Mario, if I can, just 2 cents is that, so it's a different question of putting time limits on individual items. This is a cumulative, right? And so what could happen is and we're using call to the public as an example, if people are being repetitive at call to the public, that could result in a 3-hour call to the public and nothing gets done before 9 o'clock. And so I think this is an example of, this is one rule, there are other rules that maybe address
Yeah.
smaller stuff. And 9 o'clock, since everyone's being polite and not mentioning it, we have passed 9 o'clock multiple times. This is, here, this has happened, so this is, certainly happen again.
And we may again. I mean, we're not ruling out.
Right.
It doesn't mean the gavel falls and we're all out the door at 9.
Right.
It means, are we prepared to continue and finish the evening's business?
Yeah.
But the mayor is the one that, if we hit 9 o'clock, right, that's,
I can point out that
Instructions.
it's 9 o'clock and I
Yeah.
can ask
Right.
you, the council, are you prepared to
Right.
continue?
Correct.
That's what Mario was just indicating.
Okay. We covered regular sessions. Now we'll take a look at work sessions. Specifically, there had been a discussion or a request to bring back an item for the start time from work sessions. And so this slide, ultimately, if approved and if you folks choose a different time, would also be folded into that rules of procedure. Obviously, we have them, as it stands now, set for the second Tuesday of every month. Again, that does not prohibit us from having special work sessions and that sort of thing if council so chooses. But when this item was brought up as a future agenda item, there was a discussion about possibly 5 o'clock, possibly other times. What is the desire of council when it comes to start time for work sessions?
Well, we haven't talked to, it hasn't been brought, but I don't remember talking about it as a council, which is why I wanted to talk about it when everybody was here. But we've talked about it, in like an agenda meeting, and we were just thinking, kind of mulling the possibility because, why are we doing it at 6 o'clock? The room's about empty. Hi, Olivia, not forgetting about you. I know you're here. But, generally, a lot of the public really isn't attending these. And I don't want to change times around and become confusing and people don't know when to show up for a meeting. But on the other hand, if not that many people are concerned about being here for a work session, could we do it at 4 or 4:30 or 5 o'clock and, maybe get it done and get out a little bit earlier? It's not that great to be here at 6 o'clock for most of us, and especially in the winter when it's dark, it's it's not great.
Do we have to set it within your proposed, the rules of procedure for council meetings? Do we have to set a time? I mean, I agree with what the mayor's saying, for this council as currently composed, we could agree that we want to have it earlier. But if the composition of the council changes in 2 years from now, and there are people who get off of work couldn't get here till 5:30, then I would hate for the rules of procedure to say, oh, well, we've got to have the meeting at 4 o'clock.
Well, and that's why it's a question right now, because I'm not presuming that all of you can come at 4 or 5.
Yeah.
I'm asking an open question for this moment. That can always be changed. Work sessions can always be varied. We can call it variable. We can say, hey, we want to be able to vary the time depending on the subject if we want to. There are other possibilities. We don't have to set a time in stone and expect every council that follows us to cleave to it.
That was my question, is
Yeah,
do we
and-
need to put it in the rules?
I see Mr. Gaylord wanting to jump in here, but I believe that when we come to a final document, that it will be adopted via resolution, and as such, will kind of be the law for this council. Following councils are welcome to pass their own resolution and make their own modifications, and do that same thing. Now, with regards to a variable time, I think John's going to need to weigh in on that one.
So, thank you, Mario. Mayor and Vice Mayor, I guess to be very technical about it, what I would point out is that under the current city code, I think work sessions fall under the special council meeting category. The code says that the regular meetings are on those dates and at that times, and then it says the mayor picks when the dates and times of the other meetings are. And so I think one way that you could look at this, Vice Mayor Coates, rather than restricting further councils, is this is actually the mayor opening it up for the council to weigh in and make a group decision, rather than it being the default, if the council doesn't want to make this decision, is that it, right now in the code, remains at kind of the mayor's whim. The mayor just decides. So I think at least that way you could look at this as empowering rather than restricting the council.
I just have, my biggest concern is, I know we don't get a lot of people out here, but if somebody did want to attend, is that going to prohibit them if they're working? So my follow-up question is, are work sessions broadcasted and are they recorded? So they are, so that even if it was held at 4, you wanted to watch it, you could go watch it and record it. So they're done the same way that our regular sessions are. Okay.
Does staff have any opinion, preference? Okay.
I don't.
Staff does, as a matter of fact, have opinion and preference, which is one of the reasons that I am considering this. It's simply a matter of convenience for the work session itself. So the question is for us as council members to consider. I'm just asking the question, do you want to have it earlier, or do you want to leave it at 6?
I'm okay with 4. However, I just saw this on the slide. It says public comment is not accepted on items on the agenda. It should say public comment is not accepted at all.
Okay.
Right? Because
Thank
there's
you.
no.
Yes, you're correct. I was trying to memorialize how we do it, but you're
Yeah, there's no
correct.
call to the public either, so
We
I
don't
would
have a
just
call
say-
to the public.
Yeah, there's
Okay.
no public comment on work session days.
And I'll agree with Councilman Dowell. I don't have a problem with coming in at 4 o'clock.
Nor do I.
4 p.m. is fine with me.
Okay, and I think when I bring back the next iteration of this, I'll work with Mr. Gaylord, and we'll have some language in there about if I would be the second Tuesday of every month at an hour to be set by the mayor, and then we can figure out what that is, but for the time being, we'll start conducting them at 4 o'clock. Does that work for folks?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Question on the last one. Council does not generally take any official action. What does that mean?
I think typically we provide just directions.
Well, when would we?
Since I've been here, we don't generally say we need a motion. I mean, John will have to tell me if here in Arizona you can take formal action at a special meeting.
Yeah, so Mayor, Vice Mayor Mario, it's based on what you put on the agenda. And so it's a really great thing to put in these rules of procedure is decide, if we're not going to do things at work sessions, the staff needs to know that so that we know that we're not supposed to be agendizing items at the work sessions. And right now that has been, at least in my experience, the process. We have not been, and we'll continue doing that. If council wants to take action at work sessions, we need to change the way we handle the work session agendas.
No,
So in other
because-
words, you can make that decision.
Yes.
But this is a great place to, whatever
No,
decision you make to.
that-
We
That's
can't take an
weird, though.
action, from my understanding, in a training like this, because there's no public comment.
Right.
So we can't make a motion, but we can give direction like we've been doing. Is that right?
The way that we have set up, for example, this work session, that would be correct. And if council's happy with the way this has been going, then these rules of procedure are a great way to sort of document, memorialize this setup and that this is what we want and how we're going to continue.
When in a
Well,
work
there's a-
session would we take action?
There's a distinction between a work session and a special meeting.
No.
And so the way that we have done this, or the way I've learned to do this, is that, yeah, we're not taking public comment, we're not taking any kind of action, we are not voting on anything during a work session. But if something came up outside of our regular first and third Tuesdays, it would be possible for us to call a special meeting that we could vote on, right? I mean, is that?
Is it called a work session? I mean, that's what I'm.
No, that's what I'm saying.
No,
Debbie,
so-
I'm saying it's not a work session if we're voting on something.
Right, I just want to clarify.
No, and this is very good. If I can interject real quick, Mayor, this is,
I think that's what I'm attempting to do.
right,
I'm
so
sorry.
I have scars on my back for this very reason. And this is why, because in my previous city, there was a work session. They call them study sessions over there, but it's the same thing. But as the city attorney said, from a legal perspective, work sessions are special meetings.
Right.
They're just called different because we're going to do some work at them, and we agendize them different, and the description is different. But the council was very clear at this one meeting that caused DA, district attorney investigations and everything, because we agendized it in such a way that council had the ability to give formal direction, and they ended up doing it. The claim from some of the folks in some of the residents was that it was purposely done at a work session where people normally didn't attend to get around the call to the public. And they actually allowed call to the public, but it was like we were trying to slip something through. And so this is why we get to why the minutia should be there. So now I think I have a lot of this documentation, and so in addition to adding work sessions, I will add something about special meetings and what can be done, because it's important to go in there and have that distinction. But I think I'm hearing that based on how we've been conducting work sessions, that's the way you would like to keep these. Yes.
Yes,
Well,
Okay.
then,
yeah.
And
on that last bullet point, should you drop the word generally?
Correct. That's my question. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, correct.
Now, if I can make a slightly different comment, it has been my observation that occasionally in these work sessions where staff is looking to us for comments and general direction, that I'm not always sure that staff has a clear understanding of what our comments and direction are. And so I have wondered if it would be helpful for the mayor to summarize what the comment has been, so that, and then we can all, and our mayor could say, did I represent your comments correctly? And then Jack Teal or Kirsten has a clear understanding as to what was said, and everybody agrees as to what the direction is going forward. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do, and I think you folks have seen, sometimes I will generally ask that question then, just for clarity, this is what we're doing. I know there have been some times where certain council members didn't think that clear direction had been given, and Tammy provides me the minutes, and it's generally write what my notes said, but I think that is a good point, and the mayor,
Well, yeah, and that's because I do that.
yes.
Yes.
And so, yes.
Actually, I summarize, I take everything that people have said, and I say, here's the direction in a work session. This is what we're doing.
Add that as a bullet point, because when
Okay.
you're not mayor, this is rules for council going forward, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
Right, because
Yeah.
that hasn't always been done, so, perfect.
okay.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, on this slide especially, it sounds like, it's sounding like the task is just to write down what we normally do. Because, what Mario was just explaining is, if you look in the city code, you've got meetings and special meetings. You don't have, right? So it sounds like everybody here is explaining work sessions the same way, but where's that written down? And so this is our opportunity. Let's go ahead and write it down, and then it'll be preserved the way that it sounds like everybody's understanding it.
Right, so the final bullet point is to summarize and give clear direction to staff based on their presentation, or,
Okay.
however you want to make sense of that.
I think.
Oh, can we go back
We can.
two slides?
Oh,
Second slide?
no.
No, one more forward. Nope.
back one slide.
Right there?
Well, I invoke my privilege, or whatever the term is. So regular meetings shall conclude no later than, for discussion, 9 PM, unless time is extended by majority consensus of the council. So I just want to understand how the process would play out. We reach 9 PM, everybody's bleary-eyed, I'm asleep under the table. So the mayor says we've reached 3 hours of this meeting per our
Rules of procedure?
rules and procedures. I'm going to adjourn the meeting. So unless does she ask for a motion to continue, or does somebody
As it's-
proactively make a motion?
As it's written here, it would be unless extended by a majority consensus. So someone
Right.
could say, I'd like to finish up this item, that sort of thing. If there's a consensus from that, then whatever the consensus is to do, then that's what the mayor would say, okay, then that's what we're going to do.
I would ask first, the mayor should say, okay, it's 9 o'clock, shall we continue with the business at hand? Or do you want to, delay further action on this, or whatever the case may be? And I would just ask everyone where you are with it. And if the majority say, let's stop, then I would accept a motion and a second to adjourn, right?
Right, otherwise, so we're not looking for a motion and a roll call vote to continue the meeting. Is that correct?
No.
No.
Okay, all right.
The next iteration will be clear. Yes?
Ooh, a question from the
What
audience.
about if there is an item that is still on the agenda that has not been discussed, that staff needs to have approved that night before another meeting can take place? Because we do actually have that occur
Yes.
quite a bit, where we
Yeah.
have to get it on the agenda by a certain deadline. Is there a possibility for then staff to be able to chime in and say?
Yeah, and that's the point where I will chime in, because I'll be
Could we
aware.
jump to this item and get this approved
Correct.
quickly?
Yeah, because I'm aware of those items that must be done, and so that's where I will jump in and say, council, at the very least, can we take up this item that needs to be done, that needs formal action tonight? Because we do have those times where it's last minute.
Yeah, and there's a possibility to temporarily adjourn and take a break along the way so that we can splash cold water in our faces and wake up again, or whatever. Wake up Bob, get him out from under the table, that kind of thing.
Getting back to where we were.
Yeah.
Would it be sufficient, and this is a question for everybody, sufficient if the mayor just says, do you have the direction you need? Because it could be some long, detailed whatever that she's going to have to, regroup and recap. Does that make sense?
Okay.
I mean, to everybody else up here.
That could work too, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Do you have the direction you need?
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that our clerk knows that so she can summarize it in the minutes.
Yes. All right.
The staff member can always say, I don't really have the direction.
You want me to just put in the minutes, staff indicated they understand?
Well, that's why.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, beyond that, I'm actually saying, here's what we're telling you to do, rather than just saying, well, I hope you understand, hope you got it, bye. I want to make sure that it is clear, because there have been times when it's not. Staff has walked away going, what do they want me to do? I don't know. And I am trying. I may not be achieving my goal entirely here, but I'm trying to be sure that I'm stating what the direction is. Okay,
I understand.
invitations.
Invocation, if the conversation wasn't thrilling enough. I do, thank you, crystal clear. So invocations, so it is common for invocations to be given at council and board meetings. A couple council members asked about it. I was asked about it at the day of prayer, and so I thought I would present it as an option. As Mr. Gaylord has mentioned, if council goes down the road of having invocations, council doesn't get to discriminate about the religion that gets to come and do the invocation. Because of that, and the city attorneys, plural, would have to guide us on how to create a process and ultimately a policy for guidelines. I think that would be the next step if council has a desire to move forth with adding an invocation. Typically, what you will do is either have a pastor or someone in the religious community that wants to take on setting up that rotation, or if that doesn't happen, then getting folks to do the invocation falls to the clerk's office, which is very typical. So with that, what is council's thoughts on invocations?
I'm certainly in favor of that.
Yeah, but it's tricky.
Yeah, I did some research on this online, and what it said was whether city council meetings should include invocations is a subject of ongoing legal debate and community contention. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that open public meetings with invocations do not violate the Constitution, provided the opportunity is open to all faiths. So I'm not in favor of the invocation because of the ongoing legal debate, the potential for community contention, and the challenge of finding an invocation that will be acceptable to everyone. So that's my current thinking.
I agree with the vice mayor wholeheartedly.
As do I.
I'm just curious, maybe Ms. Lennon can answer, because you've been around a long time. Has the council ever done invocations? Never, okay. Okay, thank you.
Well, we were talking about this the other day as a point, and when it was brought up that the Church of Satan would then be able to come and do an invocation, and there would be certain occasions that we wouldn't want to have invocations because if they're coinciding with Christian holidays and we're excluding people of other faiths, and it just gets into, I wish that could work. There's something kind of settling and just kind of nice about it, but I do see how it could really kind of get stretched out of hand pretty quickly, and it's a complication to things that.
I think there's bad people out there who will exploit it. I'll just say that.
Mayor, is that a reluctance on your part, Mayor?
Yeah.
Because I have 3 no's, so the 4 no's, so we'll moving on to the next one.
Okay.
Consent calendar item, these are, obviously those things that are considered basic in nature and routine. One of the things that I included in the document is some cities will place a maximum dollar amount on consent calendar items that council are willing to accept as part of the consent calendar. I've had questions from a couple council members on some of the larger items we put on consent. So in the document as 250, I've seen it all the way up to $1 million. So one, does council have a desire to place a limit on what dollar amount contracts should be on consent calendar? And if so, what should that dollar amount be set at?
Well, I hate to say it, but we have some contracts right now. In fact, we have quite a few contracts that are probably over 250 that are just general, like we do it every day. I don't see a need to do that. And I say that because any one of us can ask for it to be removed if we don't like it, if we want to make sure it's transparent with the community. The community at any point can say, hey, I'd like that pulled. So even the community can pull that. So to me, what does a number have to do with whether it's a concern for the community or not? Really, to me, the number has nothing to do with that. It has to do with if we think it should be pulled or the public thinks it should be pulled. So I don't think a specific number on there makes something more important.
Right, I agree, but who decides, so it's up to Mario to...
Well, no, I think...
How does that work?
I think then if the agreement is from council that anyone can pull it and you're not
Right.
concerned with that, then that's just not something for consideration.
Okay.
This was just one of those options that's put out there if you care.
Gotcha.
But ultimately, we take a look at our directors meeting and talk about what's routine and what should be on the new business and that sort of thing. And so I don't think it's necessary either.
Yeah.
But I was putting it out there as an option.
I guess the only thing is optics from the public,
Yeah.
because the way they view the consent agenda, and I don't think the public understands that we're reviewing the material behind that consent agenda item carefully and making decision that, yes, we're okay to agree to this item as part of many in the consent agenda. And so they just assume that, oh yeah, we're just carte blanche saying everything in here is okay, and that we have no idea what other than the title, we're just blessing based the contract or whatever based on the title.
That's what I think too. I kind of like the idea of putting some kind of number on there just so that we have a reason to have a few minutes of discussion about it.
Well,
you know?
but then we can still pull it. Any one of us can say,
I know, but
hey, I want
Correct.
the
But we
public to
don't.
hear this. But
Well,
no,
and I
because
think-
right now, honestly, we don't, but we have pulled some things.
Yes.
I know I've pulled some things because I wanted just to vote on it.
Yeah.
There was a consent. I didn't agree with the consent, what was on consent, and I wanted to vote no, and I asked to pull it. We pulled it. I said, all I want is a vote, because I wanted my vote to, be heard, and then that was it. So I think we have that mechanism. I don't know why we would need to.
And I think it's fine to be up to the city manager's discretion.
Right.
Ditto.
And I would tell you that, at least in my manja with Mario, there was discussion about council actions and that sort of thing. And I will tell you that I have had folks say, hey, I think council sometimes just rubber stamps what is presented by staff. And I said, no, that's absolutely not the case. Like, I think, you folks have shared with me that since I've gotten here, the council transmissions have gotten more detailed, that things are in there. Kirsten reviews every single one that has a financial impact, and that's very clear on the bottom where the money's coming from. The information is there, and the public has that ability. The reality is we have very little public that come if it's not an airport item, and they don't really care about what's going down. And so I think those are those things. I think that's kind of why I have the language specific like this also, because I think this is something that ultimately the final document that council chooses to adopt, the public should see that. And those are things that when we have our next snapshot, we should highlight those things and what the whole purpose of the consent calendar. I think I've talked to the mayor and vice mayor when we were on our trip about, the do you knows that come to my mind at 3 o'clock in the morning. Like, those are the things we need to start putting out. Do you know that, and for those that don't typically come to council meetings, that consent calendar items are considered routine because it's just contracts we do on a regular basis. But this council specifically reads everything and goes through it, and I get a lot of questions. And part of that is the public doesn't understand that we all have agenda review meetings, and we go over the agenda, and I answer a lot of questions for you folks during those timeframes. And so that's part of the process. And I think, this language here, I would like your folks' thoughts on it. I think one of the things that has come up in the past is in the third paragraph, once any requested items have been removed from the consent agenda, the governing body should then vote to approve the remaining items as a single vote. Typically, you'll hear folks that say, I vote to approve the balance of the consent calendar after the mayor has identified which ones have been removed. And then after approving the consent calendar, the balance, then those items should be taken up after the remainder is taken.
Right, that's
Without-
what we do. That seems to be the process.
Mayor, I don't want to turn this into a compound question, but it sounds like everyone was comfortable with what Mario just said. So if I may add two other thoughts about this slide. One would be, Councilmember Dowell highlighted a decision point for the council, which is the public pulling items from the consent calendar. That's a decision for you to make, and that's something that would be good to be in here, whether that's the rule or not. It doesn't have to be the rule. You don't have to allow people in the audience to pull things off the consent, no. But I think it has, at least in my time, it's been the practice. I don't know how long it's been the practice, maybe a long time. And there are many places that do it, so, it's not.
I think it's a good practice.
It's in the direction that is given for the consent agenda, that it's possible for a member of the public to pull an item. So that is stated prior to our consideration of the consent agenda.
Yeah, and
That's right. And all I'm pointing out, Mayor,
Right.
is that's just kind of our practice, right?
Right.
So we could if we want that to continue, we could incorporate that here.
The
I'm okay with it.
agenda will be a reflection of this. And so that's why we have that conversation, because we've changed language in there already because we don't have these. When we looked at adding the last
Deadline.
the last call to the public for people to be able to submit those forms and added that, John said, well, because we don't have formal rules of procedure, we can make these changes. But any changes that come out of here, and likely the opening for consent calendar, when I bring back the document after all of this and we have another work session, it will be much deeper, and I will provide it to you folks in advance so that you can go through it and say, okay, yeah, I think this collected all of the comments that I provided or that others provided, and this looks like a good working document for a final second work session, and then ultimately we'll bring that back to council for adoption.
Okay, so 2 points on consent then. One is, are we or are we not concerned about setting a dollar limit? I guess in general, I'm not hearing concern that we should do that. But we are continuing to keep the definition that public is allowed, not only are members of council allowed, but the public is also allowed to request pulling an item from the consent agenda for discussion and consideration.
Correct.
I think that's what I saw from Councilmember Nods. Yes.
Okay.
So I had another question, if I may.
Yes.
How many slides do you want to go back?
No, it's on this one. The items that are expenditures that were a request for waiver of procurement policy, are those always action items? Those don't go on consent, do they, or do they? I can't remember.
We do them on consent. John has recently updated the ordinance, so you will see much less of that, and I will let him know why, or say why.
Well, so Mayor, council member, You recently passed an ordinance that did away with that language about waiving the procurement policy. And so now what you have is you have sole source procurements or direct selection, which is the same mechanism no matter how much it's going to cost, and it comes to you if it's above your approval threshold. So you will authorize purchases that were made in a non-competitive fashion, like a direct selection fashion, but you're not going to see that request to waive the procurement policy anymore. To your question with regard to this slide, certainly, the council could make other rules other than just a cutoff. You could say that there are types of items that you don't want on the consent agenda. That would also be good input for the consent, for the rules, right, related to the consent calendar. And just because I'm talking right now, if it's okay, I want to throw out one more thing, which I think is similar to what you mentioned, Councilmember, which is that Mario is currently implementing a rule that I think was suggested by the council, which is that on the consent agenda, there is a dollar amount listed for the items, right? That's not a legal requirement. That was a council request that Mario has implemented. And so, there's not a cutoff when it can't be on the consent agenda, but you're seeing how much all of them are. That's another rule that, if you are liking that, that could go in the rules of procedure. So it doesn't have to be simply excluding things from the rules. There's a range of things you could do. That's a good example of something you could do.
And part of that is so the public understands. I've always said, and staff knows, that the public should be able to read the title of the item and know exactly the action that's going to be taken, the financial impact to the organization and to the community. And is this a new item, or is it a renewal, or is it an extension, and that sort of thing. And that's, you don't want to get to the point where you have these super long titles, but it should include all of that in there, because someone's going to read that. Hopefully they read the agendas. Hopefully more people are reading the agendas than are attending our meetings, but they will read that and say, I want to go to that meeting, or I want to at least tune in online and hear more about that item.
I agree with what you've already started.
Right. What do you say?
Okay. Ordinances, we know what ordinances are, so when I got here, I would ask, hey, why are we doing a resolution for this? Why are we doing an ordinance? So I think you folks have seen less of each. There are typically, funding. I think we have a WIFA one this next time that requires a resolution to be able to apply for. And so those items that require a resolution, we will do them for, but those items that do not require resolutions, we are no longer doing resolutions for those. And then this is just the basic stuff that comes from I've read more league documents in the last 3 months than I think ever, but it's helped me really immerse myself in Arizona laws and how cities are operated. And so this is really good stuff to have in the final rules of procedure. Resolutions are the same way. As I talked about, we're doing less of those. The effect of the proposal is to resolve what we're doing. Resolutions are generally more temporary and are used for council action on administrative or executive matters or for statements of general policy. So administrative matters, as we talked about, requires it to be in the form of a resolution. The one thing that John informed me is that there is no longer a state requirement that resolutions be read into the record. That's something that is up to council. If you want, again, for transparency's sake, to have the titles read into the record, we can continue to do that, but one way or the other, I would like council direction and include that in the rules of procedure.
I'm okay with continuing to do that, if that seems like a help to the records in general. What do you
I
think,
have a
Tammy?
question. Do ordinances have to be read into the record? So it's exactly the same, neither one of them. I would suggest if you read one, you read the other as well. That's what I would suggest, keeping it the same.
Can I ask our learned clerk, you're not aware of anywhere where it's written down about what we're reading into the record, right? We don't have a
It's the way it's
SOP
always been
somewhere in
done.
the city or something? I just don't know.
No, I'm not aware of it being written down. I know that it used to be, like you said, but the law has changed. So, like I said, I think it's good practice just to keep both the same. If you choose to read them you should read both.
What is the purpose of reading it into the record?
I think it used to be that they had to have 2 readings of ordinances, so they had to read it into the record and then read it into the record. But I don't know about resolutions. I don't have an answer.
Well, and 2 readings of ordinances is something that the city of Cottonwood was doing, like, within the last, 24 months. I mean, that was really recently discontinued. I think that was maybe in
It's
It was, I
mid
think,
Is it just in
it was
case-
our last council that, and I think our
Right.
last city attorney too,
maybe
said,
that discontinued it?
well, it was like, we don't have to read these twice.
Yeah, no, I think it was 2025 that the
I
council
think-
stopped
Or
doing it
20,
twice, so,
25 or 20.
yeah.
Okay, I still don't understand what the purpose of reading something twice.
I don't feel like we need to read them. Just length of the meeting, they're already on the agenda, and it's in the notes that we've approved the resolutions and the ordinances. I think we can just, I don't think that they need to be read.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree.
John, are you going to get second chair here?
Are we gonna have a lawyer battle now?
He didn't say anything wrong. No, I was just going to add that the requirement for the requirement we used to have for reading it twice on the record was a notice issue, was ensuring that the public got notice. If they didn't get it in the paper, they're at the meeting and now they have notice. It's just another way to make sure that we are doing that, and we don't need that any longer, largely because everything's online and things are done in an easier fashion nowadays. And so we have that record. We have things that are, we're not handwriting the record. We're not typewriting the record. Sometimes we're not even typing the record any longer. So it's just it's an antiquated practice that we no longer require.
So I'm,
These are all pre-internet rules generally,
Yeah.
right? Reading the resolution twice, having 2 meetings to do an ordinance. Those are generally pre-streaming, pre-online agenda.
so I advocate for not reading the resolutions or ordinances into the record.
I agree.
Well, I'm good with that. I'm saying I'm good with that. I'm not good at reading the resolutions into the record. If you want to know the truth, a couple of meetings ago, I'm driving away, and I'm like, I had 2 resolutions to read into the record. I read one and forgot the other. So, but no calamity emerged from that omission on my part. So, no, if you don't want to hear me read these, that's just fine. I'll just stop doing it.
Okay.
I'll be poorer for it, Mayor.
Yes.
We'll miss it.
Thank you, John.
Yes.
We'll miss it.
Public hearings. Speaking of plenty of things for you to say.
Oh, I have something.
Yes.
Before I forget,
Yes.
when we're doing public hearings, we often have a public hearing slide, and it would really be maybe it might be helpful. As someone leading the meeting, it's incumbent upon me to actually tell people what the rules are. But, I've been to a couple of recent meetings, and it seems to just go past people. But if it was written down on a slide, that if I could say, here's the procedure for this, I'm opening the floor, you can, or when we're doing, well, especially as we're looking for the zoning change stuff to come up, it might be helpful for people if they understand that there's a point at which I'm going to take public comment, and then I'm going to stop taking public comment. And when I do that, you can't just shout things out from out there telling me what to do. It doesn't work that way. Well, that's too complicated, though.
Correct.
I
No.
want a slide with bullet points for the public
Correct.
to see. When we put up a slide that says public hearing, I want them to be able to see on the screens, here's in 3 basic steps, here's how it works.
Yeah, no, and I think that's important, and I think, John and I have talked about how to do something like that that's very concise. I jokingly have said that, the audience and council members should be like children in the 40s, seen but not heard. But that's because they have their time here at this, and I think that's the important thing. And I've been in government, you folks have been on commissions, you've seen, it's a growing trend. I think at the league meetings, at my conferences, you hear a lot about incivility in local government, board meetings and that sort of thing. And so it is incumbent upon us to set guidelines and for council to enforce those guidelines as to what happens. And I think that's some of this, put into a very concise way is a reminder to them that, once your time is allotted and you get your moment up here at the podium, and once you leave the podium, there should not be any outbursts, there should not be any conversation that comes from the audience. And that helps for the whole purpose of the rules of procedure is for the orderly conduct of business. And I've had that conversation with folks because folks want to be able to engage, specifically on some folks that are concerned about some of the items that we have going on. And I've said with them that, you folks are setting policy for this entire community, and you have 2 days a month to do to do your business. It's, it is a public meeting, but it's not the public's meeting. It's the council's meeting, and it's the opportunity for you folks to do your business. And so that's why, it's important to have these things here. The reason why I put the order of business specifically on here, I'll go back to the other one, is from a staff standpoint, we have a public hearing that's going to be coming up. It's difficult to hold folks accountable to a 10 to 15 minute typical time frame. It works better if we can have 10 minutes, and Tammy can start the countdown down, and we can go through that. The other side of it, where it can start to get raucous, is the term I used, is where you have rebuttal from multiple folks that are allowed. Typically, you will see if someone has a public hearing and they're the applicant, they get their time. Those in opposition can do a rebuttal, or can state their case, and then the applicant would be allowed a rebuttal, but nothing after that. In the case of an appeal, then that would switch, and it would be the appellant, the applicant would get their part, and then the appellant would get a rebuttal. And I'll look at the city attorney. He's nodding, so I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but.
No, definitely. And Mayor and Council, as Mario was saying, I think staff has tried to create structure, right, for those, and I think it's a pretty good one. But it'd be great to hear, I think these rules are your opportunity to weigh in, tell if you like the structure that we've come up with. This is, conditional use permits, appeals, which are the ones you're hearing, or appeals from the Board of Adjustment, those kinds of appeals, you're in a little bit of a different role. You're in a quasi-judicial role, is what we call it, right? As opposed to a legislative role. And so this kind of structure, and even to the extent that it is a little bit modeled after a court structure, is totally appropriate for that type of a hearing.
Well, just to clarify the point, I think, what I was trying to think about here is that I was here for a planning and zoning meeting, and there was simply a misunderstanding when the chair of the meeting asked for any further comment, and people who were sitting out here thought that it applied to them. It simply was unclear. And then the people out there took umbrage because they thought he was being rude when he said, no, we're not doing that. That's all he said. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, how dare you cut me off? And it's like, yes, but that's because they didn't, it was a misunderstanding, not especially that they were, attempting to take over the meeting or be rowdy or anything, but having something in front of them, showing them this time has come to an end, is something that we could add to make clear that here's the time that you get to talk to council, and now it's over, that kind of thing.
It would, I don't know if it's feasible in our configuration now, but maybe in the future when we, renovate the council chambers, that we have a screen that, when there is a public hearing, that it just displays the public hearing order of business and just stays on that screen during the duration of the public hearing. Put that out for discussion.
No, and I think that's exactly
Yeah,
what the
I
mayor
think
had.
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's what she'd started with is, can we, and so that's when I brought up this, but what, to her credit, what she's asking for is something that's a little more concise. We wouldn't have the minutes,
Right,
all of that
understand.
other stuff, but folks would then understand that order of
Right.
business. And I think in that particular case, simply bolding the public comment, that's, and then you could do an asterisk or something, time for public input, something like that, so they understand that, in all of these 7 or 8 steps, that's the only opportunity you have to speak during this item.
Right, but it's something, during a public hearing, it's on display so that people, can refer to it or look at it or not have any reason to say they didn't know.
Yeah.
Or is what you're saying, Councilmember Marks, perhaps a screen dedicated to the bullet points the mayor,
Right.
so the presentation can be going on, or, the other screens may be
Right.
showing presentations,
okay.
but there would be a dedicated screen to the order of business
During the entire public hearing,
during the
not just
entire
during the
public
comment
hearing. Is
period.
that what you were saying, or not?
Yeah, I can't believe I didn't make it clear, but apparently I didn't. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay.
Yeah, there we go.
So, Mayor, if I may, so the related topic, and Michael was just highlighting this because this comes up a lot for our boards and commissions. There are basically 3 categories of public comment opportunities. There's call to the public, there's a public hearing, and then there's just public comment on an item, right? In statute, there are very specific rules and restrictions on call to the public. Those do not necessarily apply to the other 2 categories of public comment. And so there is an opportunity for the council to decide what are the rules that apply in those other opportunities of public comment. One great example is at call to the public, you are not permitted by state law to engage in a back and forth with the commenter. You cannot dialogue with them even if you want to. In the absence of a city rule, you could do that during a public hearing or a comment on an agenda item. So there is an opportunity for you as a council in a document like this to decide what the rule is. Are you going to apply, for example, the public comment rules if you like, or sorry, the call to public rules? If you like those, you want them to apply in all your public hearings, you could, through your rules of procedure, say, you know what, that's the rule always. We're not doing back and forth. Or you could clarify what the rule is, which would be a lot of help, I think, well, to the council occasionally, but also very frequently to the boards and commissions. It would be helpful to have that clarification, what they're allowed to be doing or what they should be doing.
Yeah, because it would be useful for all, not just the council, but also for planning and zoning and airport too, to have, a slide that's posted at the point that they're opening the floor for comment on an agendized item. We're not talking about call to the public. We're only talking about, the point at which there's an item on the agenda and there's a bunch of, room full of people who've, filed a request to speak. And so, start the process of going through. They have 3 minutes apiece. But, the point of clarification is that once they've gone through all of they've had their 3 minutes, they don't get to call out stuff from the floor. And some people are not, they're not clear about that. And I just thought if they have a visual, I mean, I can explain it to them, but if there's a visual there that they can see it at the same time that I'm explaining it, and it stays up there while we're doing that, because presumably there's no other presentation going on at that time. It's just the discussion, the back and forth about whatever is on the agenda, this particular agenda item. And that can happen more than once in a meeting. There can be several agenda items with several people speaking about different things. So I'm not trying to limit it, but I'm just saying, as a teacher, I like to have something up on the board. That's my point. I want to be able to say, now, you saw it, now I've told you, don't forget. Come on now, people, you know.
I think to John's point, John wants to make sure that we have the rules straight, though, for all public, meaning that, obviously, we can't do it on the call to the public because none of that's agendized, but should we, as a council, engage the agendized public comments? And
whatever the rule is that you decide to go in here.
Right.
Now we
Yes.
have a rule that could be displayed on a screen during
Yeah.
whatever the relevant comment opportunity is.
I mean, I would be okay with that, allowing council to ask questions of persons making public comment in a public hearing, just to give us the option. I don't know that we would use it very often, but I think it
We've
could
used
be.
it a couple times already, and I feel comfortable with it.
Yeah. Yeah, there are reasons to do a bit of back and forth.
As long as we don't do any show of hands in the audience. No polling the audience.
That's going to be in my highlights.
Okay. So anyway, yeah, but otherwise, this looks like what we're doing now, right? Do
I
any of
think-
you see anything other than the way we proceed through a public hearing now? I mean, not everything is an appeal. A lot of that has to do very specifically with
Right, and
appeals.
I think, this could be used both ways, like, under item 7, rebuttal, it could be, or number 3, it'd be appellant or applicant. You could do applicant/appellant presentation, depending on whether it's an appeal or not an appeal, but it could run the same. I think for us, it's clarification on the presentation lengths. We would rather have a defined limit that we can tell the folks, like, because they'll prepare for and make sure they get everything in their 10 or 15 minutes.
Oh, let's make it 12 minutes. I just like this.
Up to your direction.
I just like the idea of splitting the difference a little bit. 15's too long. 10 might not be long enough, but 15's too long. I don't want to hear anything for 15 minutes. Shut up. Stop talking. No, that 15 minutes is really okay too, but
And you bring up a good point, Mayor. I know we've seen it at P&Z and some of the council meetings. Like, is there a policy? Does council want a policy on when your time ends, how it goes? I think I've shared with some of you, I used to go to the state pension agency and have to do monthly comments for our city. And at 3 minutes, they shut your microphone off and you were told to move on. Like mid-sentence, you didn't get to finish your sentence. And I'm not suggesting you do that. I'm just saying, how would council like to handle that? Because that can be fraught with peril without a policy. If you allow someone to finish theirs and turns out they were someone of prominence in the community, and then the next person who's very irate about things goes off and you're like, you've reached your 3 minutes, ma'am. So I guess, again, why we're here and why he thought this document would be much longer than it initially is and will be.
well, my personal policy is to let people finish sentences, but I'm not going to let them ramble on for another 5 minutes. Heck no. They're going to stop. I'm going to cut them off at some point, but I try to let people finish their thought. And most people have been fairly respectful of the clock. I've noticed that. I've noticed that a lot.
There's got to come a time, the next couple of years, there's got to be something that's controversial. And you have somebody who's going to go a little bit over 3 minutes, and somebody else is going to notice that, and they're going to go a little bit further over 3 minutes. And we need to be careful about this on how it gets enforced. Because if somebody goes 3:05, 3:10, somebody else is getting up there saying, well, the other person went 3:10, I'm going to go a little bit longer, or,
God bless you.
Or at the 2:50 mark, they're going to say, I got one more point to make, You know, and so it would be nice to have some type of aid, whatever that might be, at the 3-minute mark to make it perfectly clear the person's 3 minutes are up. It's my opinion, having
Your timer?
had this time,
Yeah.
with council, that, if you're going to speak before council, be prepared. And don't make excuses, I'm not being heard, I didn't get a chance. Come prepared.
So Tammy, does technology currently exist? Do you currently have technology that would shut people off at 3 minutes?
We, and in the past, it has happened. IT has shut off, we can shut off all the mics from
Okay,
up there.
manually,
And
okay.
the timer always runs for call to the public.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And at one time, we also, go ahead, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I mean, the timer runs, but it doesn't, it just
It doesn't
continues.
beep or, like,
It doesn't
shock
beep or
anybody or
anything.
anything.
It doesn't, would you say shock?
I wouldn't recommend, I'm not advocating electrocution.
But it does run up here, and I know our IT has been using one that actually goes to
Changes colors.
red,
Yes.
like you're
Right.
yellow, you're in the yellow zone, you're almost done here, and then it turns red. We haven't, for this council, I don't believe, turned off the microphones, which we have in the past.
I mean, for the reasons articulated, I would prefer if it just stops at 3 minutes, where the
The
audio
mics go off, everything.
mics go off.
Well,
Because that
but I
way,
do want to point out that there really is an advantage to having a human being who actually is in charge of the meeting. And that is that if somebody is mid-sentence and they finish a sentence, and the next person wants to stretch it out longer, the next person wants to stretch it out even longer, I can put a stop to that. I can do it pretty easily. And I also have law enforcement backing if it comes to that. So I'm not really going to worry about, making sure that it's so stringently controlled. Because so far, I haven't seen the need for that. But when there is a need, I can take care of it.
I'm in favor of having some, whether it's beeping or mic cut off.
Yeah.
Me too, because it happens all the time.
I am too, and just to clarify, maybe we haven't done it with this council yet, we need to have built into this what we do with somebody who's unruly, who's sitting there and not doing anything. Because I can tell you that law enforcement is not going to take any action while this council is in session. And I can tell you that law enforcement still probably isn't going to take any action other than clear the room and let that person sit there and stand there until they're ready to leave, because we've all seen what that looks like on TV,
Yeah.
right? So there really is no law enforcement perspective on this. This is your meeting. If it's not going and somebody's up there, then you just say, we're going to go into recess until you are
That's
done.
right.
Right? So.
Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah. But I think there's a procedure, because I made the procedure for the last council because we were having those issues. So I know it was in the last council, but we had a procedure. And so the police knew what we were going to do, and we knew what we were going to do, and there was no confusion between anybody like what that looked like. So it should exist still.
Okay.
It was the
I-
council unruly behavior protocol.
Please do not institute a buzzer. I will kill you all if you try to do that. That is
I
not
don't
going to
find that funny.
happen.
I don't find it funny. I think we should discuss this and come to an agreement on how we do this. As people have leaked pretty far over the 3 minutes during my time here.
I think the most subtle way is just to cut the mic off.
And just, again, I guess to reinforce the idea of coming up with a direction from you, Kirsten just mentioned, right, that we've always had the ability to push a button and turn them off. But staff is always going to be hesitant to do something like that if you have not created a rule.
Correct.
That we're enforcing, right? And that's the same thing you can even see here, right? Typically 10 to 15 minutes, that's staff doing the best that staff can to create a rule without overstepping if you haven't created the rule, right? So, enforcement is always going to be limited.
I thought the rule was created, so I haven't pursued it, very stringently because I haven't known that that anybody had the ability to cut off the mic, and I have tried to, indicate to people that their time was up. I have said things to people and let them know that, hey, you're done. No, I didn't know that was a possibility until now.
I
If
think,
that's what you want to do, we can do it.
I think the 3 minutes is good with the mic getting shut off, because that develops consistency and, to me, leads to less litigation if somebody wanted to do that, right?
Right. And part of it's going to be a learning process. So they're going to say, oh, they mean it.
Yeah.
So they're going to get it. I'm in favor of that, absolutely.
Okay.
And then we're talking about the other presentations, 10 to 15 minutes. Are we going to decide on that tonight, too?
If you folks are willing to provide direction on that. I know it's been suggested 12 minutes, but, again, I don't have any preference. This is all just brought because we need directions to create these rules so that it can be, because we don't currently have any presentations that are pending and that sort of thing. This is really good to be able to give to the applicant or the appellant so they understand how long they have in advance and they can prepare their presentation and speech accordingly.
I think maybe we should enact this for council, too. Like, we only get so, and you have to hit that thing when you start talking. And then shut it off.
Yeah, I'm good with 10 to 15 if everybody else is. I mean, but people have gone over.
Yeah, I mean, if that's the case, I would prefer to just set it at 15, and if they choose to go under,
No more than 15.
that
No
would
more
be the
than
recommendation.
15.
Yeah, no
and then-
more than 15.
No more.
Yeah, we don't need to give them a minimum.
Yes, yes.
Tammy, can you get us some of those chess timers
Can.
for us?
But I do have a comment on posting this online. Like Mario said, this could be adjusted for either any of them, a public hearing for an appeal or a public hearing for a zone change or whatever this can be. And as far as putting this up on a board, Kirsten and I have talked about this numerous times, putting the agenda up. This could go up as well. And we could, when it's time for public comment, put up something, say, public comment time, or, it's time for public comment, and then another slide that says public comment is closed.
That's what
That would
I'm
make it
asking
very,
for.
very clear
Yeah,
when public comment,
that is what
for
I'm
these
asking
hearings,
for.
anyway.
I think John would like us to make it so we only allow one attorney to be at each meeting.
If I'm going to be publicly corrected, I would.
I'd like to just point out, he wasn't corrected, he was just supplemented.
And so I'm not going to read all of this to you. This is about proclamations and recognitions. Recently, we had a meeting where we had a lot of proclamations. It wasn't a problem because we didn't have a very heavy agenda. And those are things that I think, the mayor and I go over the agenda for each review. I think more importantly, and for Tammy's help, it would be great to have the 2 weeks prior to the meeting, folks need to have their request for a proclamation put in. And then again, you folks can read through the document and see if it's something that you have a desire. And that's the first permutation of this. I've been taking notes. We have minutes. The plan would be for me to incorporate all of those things into the draft that you received in the packet, also to include some of the stuff that was included in the presentation that wasn't in the packet. And then John and I will have a conversation about any other low-hanging fruit that, I had probably, I think I did a search, I had 11 different original emails that referenced rules of procedure when we brought them back. And I think I incorporated all of them, but I may have missed a couple of them. So the next work session that we have on this will bring that back so we can again have that dialogue. Before it's brought to you folks for an adoption, I want to make sure that you folks have all had your input, that it's a document that the majority of each of you can look at.
So the draft that you sent to us, we'll have an opportunity, because there were a number of sections that we didn't get to tonight. So
Correct.
you're saying you'll come back at a future work session?
Absolutely.
Okay, got it.
On page 2, there's a reference to the mayor as, I hate to be a pronoun quibbler, but there's a reference to the mayor as if he is not available. I'm not sure, I totally grew up with the deferential he. If the gender is unknown, it just defers to he. But I thought in this case, since the last two of three mayors have been women, maybe we could include a female gender pronoun there too.
Absolutely.
Well, I thought maybe the word there, the mayor, or in their absence,
Okay.
instead of gender.
Okay. And there are some references to members and not council members, and so I have made note to clarify that and be consistent through the document when you guys get the next version.
And there was just one other thing that I would like to make mention of, and that's oral communications. During the proper time of the agenda, taxpayers or residents of the city, could we put residents of the city first, give them priority?
Yeah, and I think we've talked about ways to kind of clarify that.
Right.
I made it no secret that this is the result of maybe 5 different
Okay.
rules or procedures from general law cities
right.
throughout the state. So I'll make sure we clarify all that when we come for the next round.
Thank you. Thank you.
Could I ask too, one of the things that has kind of come up a couple of times is about, and something that I have not done, is make sure that people not only state their name, but where they live, wanting to know if they're actually Cottonwood residents or not. And is that something council feels is important to do? Or does it?
Yeah, I think he knows that, because we've talked about it before. It's gonna go in there, I'm pretty sure.
I think it's very important.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Absolutely.
what happens, because it's happened in previous council meetings, if they refuse to say? And it's happened.
I didn't hear that, sorry. What did you say? I didn't hear that. What'd you say?
What happens if they refuse to say? I've seen it happen at a
Well,
council
that's-
meeting.
So be it, I guess.
I would say, Mayor, Councilmember, my suggestion would be that'd be something for you to think about as, how strongly do you feel about this? And, you can ask for the information. I guess is the rule that we're going to ask them to state that, or is the rule that we're going to somehow enforce it? And that would be something we don't want to think about really carefully.
It might be a piece of information too, to put on a request to speak. What is your name and where do you live?
City of residence.
Yeah, some councils want their address, but I don't think we
Yeah,
need their address. I think you just need the city, are you living in city limits?
The form
I don't-
currently says city of residence.
Right.
That's,
Okay.
but one of the problems is, for the city of Cottonwood, is many residents don't
Don't know
know
where they
they're not
live. I know,
residents.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, they don't know they don't live in Cottonwood.
Verde Village, right.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
So maybe we define that, explain it or whatever, just to clarify it somehow.
So to get some clarification, so council is in favor of language that states that we request that, but you don't want to go as far as enforcing it and having consequences if they refuse to state it?
No.
I don't see myself doing that.
Okay.
Telling people, well, if you won't tell us where you live, you need to step away from the podium. You've forfeited your right to speak. I don't think I want to go that far.
No.
Okay.
It's not going to happen that often.
Yeah. And, again, it's been my experience that when folks decline to state it, they generally don't live in the community.
Right.
If I may also add, one thing is it doesn't hurt you guys at all if they don't provide their address in the same way it hurts them. If someone's protesting a zoning case
Right.
and they say, hey, I live within that perimeter and I'm going to protest this, but then they refuse to provide the information to verify that they live within that perimeter, then we can't really register that as a protest from somebody who lives within the bounds, unless they provide something that allows us to verify that. So it really behooves them to provide that information in certain cases. So
I just got a lengthy email from a woman protesting the zoning change at 12th and 89A, and she lives in Cornville. It's like,
Exactly.
yeah.
Another thing, if I may, because it's going to take us a while to get into our new city, well, it's actually going to be here, but it's going to take a while for us to get the actual facility up and running. And is there anything we can do in the meantime to have, because we're going to have the voting lights, correct? Can we do something like that sooner or not?
We're limited by that's a different software. Our software doesn't allow that, the
Okay,
current
gotcha.
peak. So when we go to a new agenda management system, that will incorporate that, and so it won't be until then that we can bring on that.
Okay.
We can get Devo hats, and if you say yes, it just turn your Devo hat on.
Ooh, I like it. We can do, yes, no.
Council, thank you very much for the
Thank
input
you.
tonight. It's very helpful.
Thank you.
And we'll be back.
We have
Thank you.
15 minutes more before 9.
I'll make a motion for adjournment.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.